everyone. Thank you so much for joining us for the Sustainable Equine Management webinar. We are happy to have you here. My name is Terry Church, and I will be your host for today's workshop. I'm a longtime dressage rider and trainer with a passion for regenerative land management. I'm also a longtime volunteer for the Daily Axe organization, which along with the Sonoma Resource Conservation District is sponsoring this event for us today. This webinar is being recorded, and you will automatically receive a link to that recording in the coming days. I'll also be sending out a resource sheet to you which will contain information and links to topics you may have an interest in looking more deeply into. And for those of you who do not live here in the San Francisco Bay Area, I'll also be sending you a link to details and pictures of our in-person tour tomorrow at a local training facility that has implemented many of the tools and strategies that you'll be learning about today. So we are very pleased to have close to 150 people register for this course throughout 31 states, Canada, and Europe. So we will be talking to folks representing a wide range of geographic areas, features, soil types, and weather conditions. So right now I'm going to be sharing my screen with you. Always takes just a minute to bring things up. So here. Sorry, my apologies for the delay here. So here, hang on a minute. So the logos you see here of, wait a minute, it's not it. There we go. The logos you see here are of our partners who have done so much to help us spread the word about this webinar. I want to extend a particular thank you to Sonoma RCD, our local resource conservation district, who has very generously provided us with a grant to produce this event. And we are thrilled that we are able to offer this at no cost for the first time for all attendees. In addition, Horses for Clean Water, the Natural Resources Conservation Service, the San Francisco Bay Area Regional Water Quality Control Boards, the Equine Land Conservation Resource, Marin Horse Council, Natural Sport Horse, and Sonoma County Horse Council have all partnered with Daily Axe organization to get the word out about this event. And so I just wanted to take a moment to acknowledge them. And for those of you who aren't familiar with Daily Axe, we are a Sonoma County, California-based educational nonprofit that teaches people and communities how to live more sustainably by reclaiming the power of their daily actions. We do this by offering tours, talks, webinars, workshops, and volunteer installation events to provide hands-on experience with low-tech, low-cost, people-powered solutions to environmental degradation and climate change. So, for example, we offer hands-on day classes on rainwater harvesting, how to install home greywater systems, how to transform lawns into drought-tolerant gardens and food forests, how to reduce waste and conserve energy, and the like. We are fortunate to do this work in partnership with local municipal agencies, private businesses, other nonprofits, schools, and individual volunteers such as myself hosting this webinar for you today. So before I introduce to you our awesome main presenter, Elaine Blickley, I want to go over a couple of the Zoom features you have available to you. Hopefully, if you don't have sound, you are reading this screen right now, and I'm going to change to that one. I have muted all attendees, but you will have control over what you hear by selecting the audio button at the bottom of your screen. If you have a question at any time during the presentation, please type it into the Q&A section that is also located at the bottom of your screen. You will have the option to ask your questions anonymously if you prefer, and we will be answering questions at the end of each presentation. So I have a poll that I'm going to launch right now to help us learn a little bit more about our audience. I have set this up as an anonymous poll to protect your privacy. So if you would just take a moment to provide the answers that are most applicable to you, I'll just give you a few minutes to do that, and then I'll show everyone the results. So you should see that poll up on your screen. Just take a moment, look it over. Let's see, I'm wondering. Okay, I'm going to end that poll. In a moment. Let's see, I just want to make sure everybody's had a chance to finish up here. I'll give everyone another minute. Because it was kind of a long poll. Okay, and we'll just end with that. Okay, and so I'm going to share the results now with you. So it looks like for the first question, do you own, lease, or hope to own or lease your horse property? And nearly all of you said yes. 27% 5 acres or less, 22% 5 to 10 acres, 20% 10 to 30 acres, 16% 30 to 60. We have a few that had up to 100 acres and a few with more than 100 acres. And then if you do not own or lease property, are you interested in encouraging or organizing sustainable practices? Most of you said yes. Whether you own or manage a commercial equine operation, or simply keep horses in your backyard, how many are you responsible for? So most of you were responsible for 1 to 5 horses, and a few of you over 50. What is the type or types of soil in your area, or your best guess? Most of you have clay. That's really interesting. How long do you think healthy grass roots should be? 2 to 6 inches? 6 to 12 inches, 12 inches, 2 feet, 2 feet or greater. So I'll let Elaine respond to that. Do you already compost in some manner on your property? Most of you do. That's awesome. And how much manure does a horse produce in one day? And I will let Elaine talk about that as well. So I'm going to stop the poll share right now. And so without further ado, I'd like to introduce Elaine Blickley, Elaine has been presenting these types of teaching sessions both live and online for quite some time, and we're very pleased that she could be with us today to share her experience and expertise from Nampa, Idaho. So Elaine, are you there?
I am, but it says that I can't share my video.
Okay, so I will see if I can fix that.
But then I'll
Okay,
see if I can share my screen then too.
Okay. Let's see, I think I can just. Oh, there you go. There's the screen.
Great. Okay. It still says I can't do the video, but
okay, let me see. Let me just come back here. I'm just going to make you co-host.
Okay.
See if that works. How does that work?
It still says I can't share the video. I mean, it doesn't say anything. It just won't let me share the video, although my camera is on. But
right.
But
yeah,
you can
I see that here.
And you can see my screen, right?
I can see your screen.
Well, I can go ahead and start on the presentation so that we get going on it, and then I guess people don't need to see me.
Oh gosh.
Or
okay.
you can figure out anything on the back end.
I'll keep working on it. As you're
okay, so at least they can see my screen.
Yes,
so
they can see your screen.
And you and I saw each other before, so we know it's possible. But
yes, it's true.
All right. Well, welcome everybody. We're really excited to be offering this for you guys. I always enjoy working in Sonoma and California and that area, and I will enjoy it when we can be back together in person, although it's really awesome that we're able to share this with so many people across the United States and across the ocean and everything else as well. So we're happy to be here and be doing this today. So what I'm going to be talking about, I'm going to be doing two different presentations, and I'll be talking about different aspects of sustainable horse keeping and land management. And so we'll start out with pasture management. And in this talk, we're going to talk about how pastures benefit us and our horses, as well as some really cool points that you may or may not have thought about as far as how pastures can actually benefit the big system, and meaning the ecosystem and the natural world around us. And then we're going to talk about some specifics for horse pasture management, and I'm going to talk about some. I'm going to touch briefly on some horse health issues for pasture management, and talk about how you can manage those as well. And so here we go. Let's see. Okay, so before I jump into the pasture management, I am going to just give you a little bit of background on myself, because my background's different, and I just like to share it with people so you know where I'm coming from. And I always like to hope that there's some young folks in the background that might be inspired to jump into this field. So my undergraduate degree is in psychology and biology, and then I have a graduate degree in media production. But I've been a horse person my whole life, and sort of later in my career, after I did journalism and video production backgrounds, I kind of stumbled into a job working for a conservation district outside of Seattle. So like the RCD, the Resource Conservation District, that's one of the sponsors here. I was working for a conservation district and in the Seattle area, and it was just such an exciting job. working with natural resources and conservation, it kind of tied together a lot of my different interests and began to focus them. And it was just at the right time, at the right place, where the conservation district there and other natural resource agencies were working on endangered species issues, specifically on salmon. And I really got to focus on those water quality kind of issues that happen along with livestock practices and with horse keeping. And even more, I was able to focus in on horses and horse keeping and try to come up with practices that are going to benefit everybody, not just salmon and water quality, but it wouldn't make sense to us as horse owners if it only worked for, if it was only a one-way street. So, you know, we began looking for and building what we call best management practices for horses and horse owners that are win-win-win for everybody, for horse health, for horse keeping, for the productivity of our properties, for cost effective for us as horse owners, for the aesthetics of our neighborhood, and then also good for the greater world around us. So for water quality, for air, for soil, for wildlife. So Matt and I, my husband and I, are horse people. I'm your typical horse crazy girl who's had horses my whole, or been involved in horses my whole life. And Matt's trains now and teaches, and we both compete primarily. I can primarily compete in ranch riding and ranch trail. And I like to show people about our property. And Terry, it's not wanting to advance right now. Let me try another way to advance it. There, okay. I like to tell people a little bit about where we live in our property, just because, again, I hope it might provide some perspective, but as well as some inspiration for some people. So we now live in southwestern Idaho, and our property is Sweet Pepper Ranch, and we practice all the things that I teach at our place. And in fact, we make them central to the business plan for managing our place. So in other words, we want to attract clients that are going to be interested in manure management and wildlife enhancement and mud management and these kinds of things. So just a little bit about Sweet Pepper Ranch. So we have a horse motel, which means that we have a place for keeping horses that are on the road. So if you're traveling with horses, you have a safe place to stay. And we also do short-term boarding. And then we also do boarding as well. Matt has horses, clients' horses here in training. And we used to have a bed and breakfast, and then of course COVID came along, and so that part wasn't going to work too well for us anymore. So we have a glamping tent, and it's been super popular during COVID and a lot of fun. So horse people stay there as well as non-horse people who want to get a horse experience. And then we do plugins for living quarters and RVs as well. And then, as I mentioned, Matt trains and does clinics and lessons. So Horses for Clean Water is my business. And what it is classes, farm tours, workshops, educational materials that I develop, individual consultations. And they're all about nature-based solutions for keeping and managing horses and livestock. So Horses for Clean Water, what it is, it's the program that I created in the Seattle area like 30 years ago, almost. And the clean water part means that we're looking for solutions for managing livestock properties so that you don't get runoff from muddy horse properties or overgrazed pastures or manure piles, because these things can cause really serious issues with surface water contamination and groundwater, even groundwater contamination. So what it means is that we're looking for solutions for managing horses so that it's going to be good for horse health and owner convenience and improve productivity of our properties, decrease vet bills. We're going to improve the aesthetics of our neighborhood and then reduce environmental impacts like runoff from nutrients from manure and urine and bacteria and sediments from erosion. So hopefully we're going to decrease what's called non-point pollution. Non-point pollution are these things that I just mentioned, like runoff from a manure pile that might go into either the groundwater or the surface water, like a creek or a pond or a wetlands, or from misused chemicals, overused fertilizers. So Horses for Clean Water is looking for win-win-win ways of horse keeping that are going to be beneficial for everybody. All right, so let's jump into pasture management, and we'll start out with talking about some of the problems associated with not having a pasture management plan. As I work with horse owners and natural resource agencies work with horse owners, I would have to say that pasture management is probably the hardest practice to implement for horse owners. I think there's many reasons why it's just kind of hard for us to get our mind around it. I think one is that we want our horses to be out as much as possible, but we have some idea that there are health issues with horses eating too much pasture. So it's kind of a approach avoidance kind of thing. But in this, so I hope to be able to help you with that by the end of this talk this morning. And in this picture here, you can maybe see that the pasture is quite overgrazed, and really all you have in this picture is like green fuzz. It's not even as tall as manure balls are. And the problem associated with this is if you irrigate or if it rains, you're basically, it's going to be like flushing a toilet. So you're going to get manure and urine and sediment, and you're going to get erosion from topsoil, and it's all going to wash off that property. In this case, it's going to go to an irrigation pickup ditch in the middle of the property, which goes to bigger and bigger water bodies and eventually ends up in lakes, and lakes feed into rivers, and rivers feed into the ocean. But it could, it could also go seep into the groundwater and cause problems that way. So all of this, everything going on in this picture is not beneficial to anybody, to the property owners. It's not productive for the livestock because there's hardly anything to eat, and then it's going to cause water quality issues. So mismanaged pastures can be problems for our neighbors as well. This is older houses in this picture. And by the way, all of my pictures I try to take from a sampling of all the different places where I have worked, because I like to do that because I want to show that the problem is universal. It's not just in Sonoma County. It's not just in Seattle. It's not just in Idaho where I live, it's, it's in other countries. It's all across North America. These are issues that horse people are facing. And really what we have more of is new homes moving into neighborhoods like this. And those people moving into the rural areas, they may or may not be as tolerant of things like weeds and dust and flies and odors from manure piles or runoff from muddy areas. And that, frankly, I think it's one of the reasons why us horse owners end up with bad reputations, is because of the way our properties are often managed. So, and another problem, a few more problems that I'm going to talk about here associated with not having manure management plans and pasture management plans in place. One other problem is weeds. So this picture here from the Pacific Northwest is super green. And at first glance, you'd think that this is a good situation. But if you look closely at the picture, you'll see that there's very little grass growing, and really what's growing are yellow flowers, which are weeds. And so what has happened in this picture is that the equines in it have grazed and overgrazed the grass so that the grass is starting to die out. And what they leave behind takes over, and that's the weeds. So it may be green, but it's not necessarily healthy. And then when you have a overgrazed pasture, it actually becomes unhealthy for our horses. And that's because they are pulling up the grass plants by the roots and ingesting the soil and the parts of the plants that are going to be highest in sugar. I'm going to talk about sugars in grasses, and you're going to see how an overgrazed pasture is actually the one that's going to be the highest in sugar and the least healthy for our horses. And then, of course, if they're ingesting the roots of the plants, they're going to be getting soil particles in their gut, and an accumulation of soil particles can cause what's called sand colic. So an overgrazed pasture like this one is going to be solid sugar. So grass plants store the most of their non-structural carbohydrates, which are sugars, in the bottom 2 to 3 inches of the plant, and as well as in their roots. And if you remember when you were a kid and you'd lay in the grass in the lawn or out in the pasture, and if you pulled out a grass plant by the root, if you wanted to chew on it, which part would be the part you'd want to chew on? It'd be the bottom part that has the little white stem on it. And that's because that's where the sugar is. And horses have a highly defined sense of taste. If you look at their head, their sinus cavities and their tongue and their palate is, almost a foot long. So it's highly refined and much more tuned than ours is. And so they also have teeth that allow them to literally crop the grass right off at the stem, right up at the dirt line. And so they are able to go in and just clip out that super sweet, sugary grass. And they like that, and it's understandable. So that's why you develop those spots in your pasture that become overgrazed, because they're able to go back and back and back again. And when, a half of an inch of a grass blade grows up, they can go in and just clip it off right at the stem and effectively overgraze it. So many times I hear landowners say, oh, I have my horse in a candy bar pasture. And you go and look, I mean, I said that wrong. They say, I have my horse in a diet pasture. And I go and look at it, and what is it? It's a candy bar pasture like this. And so to me, I call that a candy bar pasture because it's just solid sugar. And really what you want to have them on is what I call a bran muffin pasture. So that's one that's long, like 6 to 9 inches long or longer. And that's going to have much more fiber in it, like a bran muffin. And there's still only so many bran muffins that we all need to be eating, but it's going to be much healthier to eat a bran muffin than it is to eat a candy bar. And by the way, this is a picture I took in Australia. And that's just to reiterate that these are issues that we're all facing and struggling with. So let me talk about climate change and pasture management and how a healthy pasture like this, and this is a great picture of a bran muffin pasture. This is a pasture that has a lot of fiber in it and is going to be a lot healthier for a horse. So climate change issues. Overgrazed pastures like the past 2 or 3 slides that we showed that had a lot of bare spots and where the grass plants had very few tillers or leaves, those are not going to be helping with climate change. And in fact, they're going to be contributing to it because dark ground is going to be hotter and attract more sunlight. It's going to dry out more. And when it dries out, then that requires more irrigation and more moisture. Whereas when you have a pasture like this with a lot of good grass coverage, it's going to shade the ground and keep it cool. It's going to help retain moisture so you don't have to water as much and you can conserve water. And when you have tall grass like this, the plants are going to be photosynthesizing more and sequestering carbon and nitrogen from the atmosphere. And that process of capturing and storing the atmospheric carbon dioxide is called carbon sequestration. And we know that carbon is one of the greenhouse gases. So actually having plants and pasture is one of the methods of reducing the atmospheric gases that are causing and contributing to climate change. So we want to have grass plants as healthy and long as possible with as much leaf area as possible to be photosynthesizing and taking out that CO2. So in this picture here is just to give us a generalization or an idea about something that I want to empower horse people with. So this is a map developed by Bloomberg using USDA data, and it gives us a rough visualization of all the ways that land is used in the continental United States. And so my point here is to show us that horses and livestock in general play a sizable role in terms of how land is managed, or they potentially can play a sizable role. So if you think about it, and if all of us horse owners managed our land in such a way that the land remained grassy and vegetated, like this kind of pasture in this picture, I think that it begins to give us an idea that we as horse owners can go a long ways towards helping to sequester carbon and reduce greenhouse gases. So we can make a difference. All right, water quality concerns. So in this picture here of a pasture without any pasture management going on, you're going to have runoff from that manure pile and from the muddy high traffic area. And you can see that it's an overgrazed pasture. I mean, it's barely even green fuzz, and there's manure right up to the edge of the water body there. And all water bodies connect to bigger water bodies, so you're going to get runoff of fecal coliform from manure and nutrients, as well as sediments from the manure and the mud and the overgrazed pasture, and that's all going to wash into that water body. And then that water body hooks up to bigger and bigger water bodies, and those contaminants, that non-point pollution, can potentially affect fish, shellfish, other aquatic life, the riparian zone along the creek or the water body. That's called a riparian zone. So all of that can be negatively impacted by that one overgrazed pasture. But on the other hand, a healthy pasture, I hope that people are beginning to see that a healthy pasture can provide so many benefits for us. It can provide natural exercise and mental health outlet for our horses. It can provide a high quality, nutritious diet. It can, by doing that, then it can decrease our hay bill and save us money. It provides a pleasing picture for you and the neighbors. Those healthy grass plants with long established roots that we'll talk about in a minute can hold soil in place and help prevent erosion. And then all of that just starts working as a system. Once you have that healthy grass and pasture in place, then it starts working for you and filtering out nutrients and sediments from manure and urine, because they need those nutrients to make the to keep growing. And then a healthy pasture can also contribute to reducing the effects of climate change. Okay, so now let's start with learning how to become grazing managers of our property. And the fun thing is that all good grazing managers and grass farmers know about 4 things. So you might have thought that you're coming here to learn how to raise horses, but for the next few minutes at least, we're going to talk about how to be a grass farmer and grow pasture. So every pasture farmer knows about the crop. And what is the crop that we're growing? It's grass right now, or pasture. We know about the harvester. What's the harvester? It's the horse. We're going to know about dirt, which is soil, and we're going to talk about confinement areas. So let's talk about those components. And let's first talk about pasture, the plants, the crop, a little bit more. In the beginning, we did the poll to talk about roots, to see what people thought about what roots, how the length of roots should be. And so we'll talk about that right now. So the leaves on a grass plant, what you and I would call leaves, they're actually called tillers. And the tillers act like solar panels, and they take in sunlight. And then photosynthesis occurs inside using chlorophyll, the green stuff. And along with roots, or along with the nutrients and water from the roots, then the plant creates its food. And the plant needs a minimum of 3 to 4 inches of solar panels, or else the grass plant can't create its food anymore, and its health is going to be compromised. And once its health is compromised, if it doesn't have 3 to 4 inches of the solar panels or the leaves, it starts taking nutrients from its roots, because its roots act kind of like its bank account. And if it doesn't have enough factory to produce food, it's going to start cashing checks from its bank account. And pretty soon that bank account gets smaller and smaller, and those roots get reabsorbed till they're shorter and shorter. And then next thing you know, it's like the picture in the beginning, and the horse is pulling out the grass plant by its roots. So let's look at the next picture. And that shows you, that's the one picture on the right where we saw in the beginning with the overgrazed pasture. And we can imagine that that horse is pulling out the grass plants by its roots. However, if you think of the pictures that I was showing you previously with the tall grass plants, those plants actually have roots that are about 2 feet long or longer. So healthy grass plants and pasture plants should have roots any place from 2 feet all the way up to 20 feet, which is crazy to think about. Some of it's going to depend on the amount of and the depth of topsoil that you have, but it also depends on if your grass plants are overgrazed. So if the grass plant, just to reiterate, if it doesn't have enough of the tillers, the solar panels, to manufacture its own food, it takes from its roots, and its roots get reabsorbed, and pretty soon the horse is pulling the roots out, the plant out by its roots. So if you look at this picture, this gives you an idea of what healthy grass plant roots should look like. So what we have here is an annual crop that's harvested every year on the right, and you can see how short its roots are. And then what you have on the left is an established prairie or pasture that's been there for a long time and has not been overgrazed or harvested. So they've taken that bunch of grass out there and washed its roots out so that you could actually wash the dirt from the roots, so you could actually see how long healthy roots should be. And you can imagine that if you have pasture with roots that long or even half that length, they're going to be able to retrieve nutrients, a whole variety of nutrients, as well as moisture. And they're not going to have to be watered as much as the crop on the right-hand side is. So another thing that we need to know about our crop as grass farmers is what happens in the soil and how that affects how plants grow in the wintertime. So first of all, in the wintertime, when it's cold, grass plants quit growing. It depends on what part of the world that you're in. But for the Pacific Northwest, for the big picture, the growing season is about 120 days. The grass is still green, but it's going to take about 4 months for that grass to grow. And otherwise, it's just kind of sitting there dormant and not doing much. The other thing that can potentially be happening in the wintertime is that our soils are saturated from rainfall or from snow melt. And soil should be about 50% oxygen. And our grass plants, and actually not just grass plants, all plants breathe through their roots, which seems crazy, but they do. So they need to have soil that's healthy and has air pockets in it. And if you put something heavy onto wet soil, it's going to compact it and push all of those air pockets out, like you see on the right-hand side in that drawing. And when the soil gets compacted, the grass plants can't grow as well, and their roots start getting reabsorbed. They get shorter and shorter. And then you get other plants that can grow there, and they start moving in, opportunistic plants. And so those are going to be more like plants with tap roots, which are otherwise known as weeds. So to summarize that, in the wintertime, depending on where we live, for the most part, you don't want to graze your animals on pastures in the wintertime unless your soils are dry enough and unless you have enough root growth or leaf growth of the tillers. The thing that you want to remember is that your grass plant is going to need at least 3 to 4 inches of green leafy tillers of growth in order to manufacture food. If it doesn't have that, you're compromising the health of your grass plant. Okay, let's talk about our favorite subject, and that's the harvester. So let's talk about how these harvesters graze and what we know about them. So horses are considered what's called selective grazers, and that means they only like to eat some stuff. They like to move around. They will even do a little bit of browsing where they grab something taller, but they primarily eat with their heads down. They've been designed by nature to do that. And left to their own devices in the same area, they're going to overgraze an area in order to get to the short, sweet stuff. And they'll let that tall, fibrous stuff keep growing, and they won't want to go to that because it's not as tasty. It's a bran muffin, and it's not a chocolate chip cookie. So in the wild, nature designed them so that they would actually move on. They would eat here, there, and then keep going so that the mountain lion didn't know where to expect them to be. But we don't have that kind of, most of us, unless you've got a lot of land, don't have those kinds of options. We have smaller acreage, so we have to manage them. So we'll talk about that, putting all of this together in just a minute. So now let's talk about the third component that us pasture grass farmers know about, and that's the dirt, otherwise known as soil. So in this picture here, you can see how it's eroded away. And that gives you a soil profile. And you can see that the topsoil is pretty shallow. That's the dark stuff. And then you've got the other soils that may not have as much nutrition in them. But there's 2 ways that you can find out more about your soils. And if you want to grow pastures, you've got to have a knowledge of your soils. So you can learn about your soils through looking at checking out this web soil survey, or by doing a soil test, and both of them are really easy to do. And by the way, I might mention that in this picture here, in any place, it takes someplace in the neighborhood of 100 to several hundred years to form 1 inch of topsoil. So if you are a grass farmer, and if your goal is to have pasture for your soils or for your horses, you don't want your pastures to get overgrazed and have your topsoil run off, because then you can't grow pasture very easily. So let's talk about the web soil survey. This is something that's been done by the Natural Resources Conservation Service. That's the NRCS. They're part of the USDA, or they're under the USDA. And so you can go there, anybody can. You can go to this website you just Google or search for web soil survey, and then you can navigate to any place in the United States and learn about the type of soil there. It's going to be accurate down to about 5 acres, but it's really amazing, interesting information. It'll ask you for your address, and then you can plug that in, and then it's going to tell you basically like the horoscope for your soil. You'll learn about the type of soil you have, you'll learn about how productive it can be and how many tons of grass you can, or hay you can plan to get off of your soil. So Matt and I used this when we were moving 12 years ago to southwestern Idaho. We used the web soil survey for every horse property that we were interested in. We would go online and find out more about their soil because we knew we wanted pasture, and if it was going to be rocky or super droughty, it wasn't going to work for us as horse property. So the other thing as a grass farmer that you can do to learn more about your soil is to do a soil test. So your RCD, your land grant, university, and extension, as well as the NRCS are all great resources to help you with this, to learn how to do a soil test. And I'll send you a handout as part of your follow-up on how to do a soil test. But basically a soil test means that you take a shovel and or an auger, and you go to 5 or 8 different spots on your pasture. You pull up the sod, you take a little shovelful of dirt, and you put it in a bucket, and then you mix it all up, and you just need like a cup or a half of a cup. That's a sampling of your soil, and you send it to a soil lab, and then they do an analysis to tell you how much fertilizer you need, or if you even need fertilizer. And there's actually no other way to know exactly what your soil needs. It's not something that I can look at, or that even a soil agronomist can look at and say, oh, you need X amount of fertilizers or nutrients. So it costs like 25 or 30 bucks, easy to do, and then you've got specific information. Okay, so your last component for being a grass farmer is to know about and have a confinement area. So the confinement area is the heart of your pasture management program. Sometimes we call it a sacrifice area, because you're sacrificing this grassy area. You're sacrificing it as grassy area, and you recognize that grass is never going to grow on it, and that you're going to have to do certain things to mitigate mud and manure. But you recognize that this is actually going to become the heart of your pasture management program. It's where you're going to keep your horses so your pasture never gets overgrazed during the summer and the growing season. And it's where you're going to keep your horses in the wintertime when your pastures are dormant or the soils are super saturated. Okay, so here's just a few examples of confinement areas. What I like about this picture is that the confinement area is in a high, well-drained location. It's going to be chore efficient for the horse owner to get to and to feed and do chores. It has footing in it, and maybe you can't tell, but there's gutters and downspouts here to collect the clean rainwater and not let it contribute to causing more mud. There's fencing at this end. It's temporary fencing. It's easy to just unhook it to allow the horses into the pasture. The pasture is down slope, which is great because then it becomes a biofiltration area, which means that this vegetation in the pasture is going to filter out any runoff from this confinement area. And those grass plants are going to utilize it. They need water, they need nutrients from manure and urine in order to grow. Here's another example of a confinement area. This is in our current place. You know, confinement areas come in different sizes and shapes, and we're going to talk about that in more detail in the next class about equine enrichment opportunities. Here's another example of a confinement area. So when to use a confinement area, you use it during the rainy season or the winter when your grass plants are dormant, or in the summer during a storm event or when you're irrigating, anytime that the soils become saturated. You also use a confinement area in the winter, as I've mentioned, when the pastures are dormant or frozen. You use it in the summer when you're letting your pastures rest and regrow so that they aren't overgrazed. And you use a confinement area anytime to avoid this situation of overgrazing. And you use a confinement area so you don't end up with an overweight individual like this chunky monkey is here. So as a grass farmer, now we've got some of the tools of our trade and we're ready to implement grazing management. So the way it works is in the springtime, you begin grazing gradually, about an hour at a time. That's because you're introducing something new to the horse's diet and you have to give the flora and microbes in their gut a chance to catch up and adapt to the new feed. So about an hour at a time, or whatever your veterinarian suggests or advises. And then over a period of weeks, you can work up to a couple of hours. And you only want to put horses out on pasture that's at least 6 to 8 inches long. And then you want to remove them from any area that's grazed down to 3 to 4 inches. You remove them, and next time you put them out, you put them into a different grazing area. So rotational grazing is the way that we want to go for managing any pasture area. And really, you can take any size pasture and divide it into smaller acreages or smaller areas. So in these two examples here, these could be 1 acre pastures, or they could be 4 acre pastures divided up, or it could be an 8 acre pasture divided up. But the idea is that you have your confinement area. In both of these pictures, you have a confinement area and a shelter. And each day when the animals go out to graze, they start with the first grazing area, and they're out there for their period of time, 2 hours or whatever it is. And then they go back to their confinement area. And then they go back to the grazing the next day. And then once that first grazing area is grazed down to 3 to 4 inches, the next day when they go out, they're going to go into the second area. And each day going forward, they go back into that second area until it is grazed down, and so on and so forth until they get to the fourth or last grazing area. And once that's grazed down, then hopefully the first one has rested and regrown enough so that you can start grazing that area. So it gives you, it's treating your horse more like a lawnmower, and it's going to make your pastures more productive and giving you more options to keep your horses out on pasture longer. So let me show you some visualizations of how to manage rotational grazing. So this is one of my friend's properties outside of the Seattle area. And she put in permanent fencing to divide up her pasture into 3 different sections. She probably had maybe about 5 acres of pasture, and all of it went up to this part of her confinement area. So each horse had an individual pen, and then all those pens hooked up to here, and then all of the grazing areas hooked up to that catch area. So she could open whatever gate she wanted from here, and they would just go out into the pasture. Super chore efficient. here's what we do on our place. Basically all we do is we have 6 acres of pasture over here. It's irrigated pasture, and we just move temporary grazing stakes, and we have electric tape and with a charger, a battery charger, and we just move that around. So like every 3 or 4 days, we move it to a new spot. And it's much more labor intensive than what Anita, my friend in the last picture, does. But we also hay our pasture. So we wanted to have, we didn't want all the fencing in there. We wouldn't be able to access the pasture for haying. So the golden rule of pasture management is to never graze your pastures below 3 to 4 inches. What you want to think is that grass, the grass owns 3 to 4 inches, the bottom 3 to 4 inches. You as the grass farmer own what's above. So I always tell people that they should have a ruler, and at least to start with, get a ruler out so that they can visualize and get to know what 3 to 4 inches is, and when their grass plants are going to be too short to graze anymore. And they need to know what 6 to 9 inches is, so they need to know when they can put their horses back out on pasture. And another rule for pasture management is that you don't want to let your plants go to seed. Once they head out and completely develop a seed head and dry out, the grass plant figures its job is done for the season, and it's going to kick back and put its feet up and go dormant and no longer be green, photosynthesizing, and nutritious. So you as a grass farmer want to try to manage your harvesters to keep your grass plants from growing to seed. But if you can't keep ahead of your grass, you're going to have to mow it. And so we'll talk about some of the equipment that you might need for doing that. So there's different kinds of mowers out there, and they can be a tractor and a pasture mower, like this brush hog here. That's about the smallest tractor that you'll see out there, and the smallest pasture mower. So, tractors and equipment is expensive. If you can afford something bigger, you'll get your mowing done faster. But, it just all depends on a person's budget. And on the lower left-hand side, you see a lawn tractor. And some people, if you have a small pasture, a lawn tractor might work really well for them. You just want to make sure that underbelly mower can be set at about 6 inches. And here's another example on the right-hand side is a pull behind gas-powered mower that you could use with a 4-wheel drive ATV. So there's many different options. There's even walk behind different kinds of mowers that might be useful for small acreage. So a harrow is also important because out in the pasture, we can't pick up the manure. We have to harrow it. And by that, I mean dragging it, and dragging it breaks up the manure so that it destroys fly habitat. It doesn't breaking it up does not destroy worm eggs, but breaking it up spreads out the nutrients. So those nutrients aren't being concentrated in one area, and so that the manure isn't suffocating the plants. So we need to harrow out in the pasture to spread that manure out. And what I usually suggest is when you take your horses off of one of those areas that's grazed down to 3 to 4 inches, that's when you want to go in and harrow, and then let it rest and regrow. So you also want to harrow the rough. That's the area in the pasture that the horse is going to urinate and defecate in. It's a natural defense mechanism for horses to concentrate their potentially any parasites or pathogens that they might have. And if we allow that to happen, then the quality of the pasture is going to decrease over time, because that area is just going to keep expanding and expanding. So we have to go in once the pasture's been grazed down to 3 to 4 inches, pretty much like what's in this picture. What should actually be happening then next is that they harrow the rough and the whole pasture, and they let it rest and regrow to 6 to 9 inches. So here's some examples of manure spreaders, because spreading compost is really useful and important, particularly with climate change, because compost on pastures is going to help hold moisture in so that you don't have to irrigate as often. And it'll keep your pastures going through the droughty season longer. So ground-driven manure spreaders mean that as you pull the manure spreader, that's the tires turning is what's going to kick the compost out. A PTO-driven manure spreader means that you have to hook up the power takeoff right here to the tractor, and then that's what kicks out the compost. So compost application guidelines: you want to apply compost during the growing season. The best time to apply it is when the plants are growing really fast and they can utilize that compost, which is late spring. So for most of North America, that means like May and early June, and then early fall. So again, that means like right after Labor Day, so in September. And you can apply compost to pastures, lawns, gardens, only during the growing season. You basically just want to apply it in a thin layer and no more than 3 to 4 inches total per year to the same area. So just a quick word about metabolic issues. So that would be horses that have things like horses that are overweight or have cresty necks or Cushing's or laminitis. This is my horse Bob, and he's had laminitis. So we have to be careful about him on any kind of pasture grass because of the amount of sugars in the grass. So some options for horses like this are that you can try grazing at night. It's an excellent option because grass plants are only photosynthesizing when the sun is out. So at night, they aren't manufacturing more of these non-structural carbohydrates, so they have less sugars. You can also break that down so that you only turn them out in the early morning until about 10 a.m. That's about when they really kick into high gear. And remember that brown grass can still be high in sugar. It still can potentially have sugar in it. The color doesn't indicate how much sugar is in it. You have to actually do a hay analysis. Implementing a rotational grazing program like we just talked about is going to help you with a metabolic horse, because you can keep them on that bran muffin pasture and avoid putting them on a candy bar pasture. And then you can also think about things like grazing on cloudy days or in shady pastures, because those areas are going to have less non-structural carbohydrates because there's not as much sun to manufacture food. You can also try a grazing muzzle like this one. There's many more on the market that are pretty amazing and maybe a little more horse friendly. They have bigger spaces for their nostrils. Then when you feed your horse, always weigh your hay so that you're not overfeeding, and be sure to exercise your horse a minimum of 30 minutes a day, 3 times a week. All right, so pasture management and how we manage our pastures is going to determine a lot for us as far as horse health and chore efficiency and saving us money. And also good pastures are going to help contribute to reducing climate change or the effects of climate change, as well as reducing non-point pollution and helping with improved water quality. So overall, it's going to help with a healthier ecosystem and happier horses and happier horse owners. So here's just a few resources that Horses for Clean Water offers for anybody. Our website has tip sheets and lots of other good information on it. We have Horses for Clean Water as well as Sweet Pepper Ranch if you want to find out more about our place. I also write for the Horse magazine, and they're an excellent professional resource. Here's our QR code if you want to grab your cell phone and sign up for our newsletter, and then you can get information about upcoming events and tip sheets and all sorts of things. So Terry, that's it, and it still won't let me sign on. And in fact, when I click on the video, then it won't let me move forward quite. It takes away the controls on my keyboard somehow, but anyway.
So on the on your left-hand screen on the bottom, on the
Yeah.
start video, you're talking about that.
Yep.
Try see what happens. Do you have a participants button at the bottom?
No. Oh, you mean
or
like
panelists?
Participants, yeah. It says 66 participants.
Yeah, so click on that and it should show up on your right-hand screen. If you click on panelists, you should be on there. You should see your name on there.
I don't see. Oh, okay, I see it there. Yeah.
Yeah.
And do
okay,
what?
So you see do you see your name there?
Yes.
So if you hover your cursor over your name, there'll be a couple of boxes that come up to your right, and there's one on the right that says more.
Yes.
And does it give you permission to start your video there?
No, it says pin or rename.
Gosh. I went through and checked all of the places. I even went back to the original Zoom page online where I set up the whole webinar. And
well, at least I can share my slideshow, so that's the important part.
The other thing I can do, Elaine, is to make you host, which might override some of those issues, so I can do that. The problem is then
it's okay with me if it's okay with I just want it to be right for the participants, so that's fine. I mean, yeah, I've got pictures of. I'm okay with it.
I was hoping they'd be able to see you as well.
I'm afraid if we change too much, maybe something else might go wacky.
Yeah, exactly. Well, there are a number of questions that came up. You want me to read them to you?
Sure.
Okay. So the first one was, will we get specific on star thistle management? Do you have anything to say about star thistle?
No, the most important thing for weed control is to have really healthy grass plants to try to out-compete the weeds. But what I would say for specific weeds that are in your region is to contact your local RCD or extension or the extension office. I mean, I would contact, if it was me, I would contact both of them. And they're going to have good information for you on how to control weeds in your area. And it's different for all of them. And what we really, for all of the weeds, I mean, it's different. And what we really encourage is that people don't go to like the feed store and ask the 16-year-old kid how to manage the weeds, because they may or may not know, and they might send you home with the wrong herbicide. So we want you to get your weeds ID'd correctly, and then we want you to get specific information on how to manage that weed. So it's that kind of information is going to be like what time of year, what stage of growth, and what herbicide, or maybe there's other non-chemical controls that might work really well with that weed. So that's what I would say for any questions that are about specific weeds and weed control.
Yeah, so I happen to know that there's a person here who's watching the webinar who has a 40-acre property here. He had a major star thistle problem when he first started his uh, grazing management plan and was able to really, for a large part, eradicate most of those star thistles just through good management. And so maybe I'll get together with him and do a little write up and send that out to answer that specific question. I think he would have a lot of good things to say about that. So the second question is, if a tall grass pasture is good fiber, that means mowing your grass to keep it short is actually creating a candy bar effect, correct?
Uh-huh.
I,
No, I'm glad they asked that question because
yeah.
that's not what you want to be doing. You're only mowing it down to 6 inches. What you want to do is when they've grazed the majority of the area down to 3 to 4 inches, you take them off, you harrow to spread the manure, and you mow. And mowing will actually help outcompete the weeds. So grass plants do like to get mowed. It makes them create more tillers, which are the leaves. It stimulates them to do that. And it keeps them in the stage of growth that's going to be more palatable to a horse and less fibrous. So if you mow and you cut down the really tall stuff that's trying to go to seed, you're going to mow it down to about 6 inches, and then it's going to regrow. And so it's going to be more palatable. It's not going to be mowed down to 3 to 4 inches. You're going to mow to 6 inches, and then you can let it all rest and regrow. So you mow it down to 6 inches and it's getting like what was left over that was tall. And then the small stuff that was 3 to 4 inches is going to start growing back. So by the time you put it back, the horses back on, the smallest part is going to be grown up at least to 6 inches. And then you'll have other parts that are 9 inches or whatever. So you've knocked down the fibrous part and you're letting the short part rest and regrow. So David, I hope that makes sense and helps you. Does that make sense?
Does to me.
All right.
Maybe he'll put a reply in there. The next question is from Trish. How do we manage manure accumulation in pastures with tall grass? I know you spoke to this a little bit, but.
Yeah, I'm glad to reiterate it to make sure that it makes sense. So you want to harrow the manure out in the pastures. You can't pick it up. It's too hard. Unless you have a candy bar pasture, then you can pick up manure. But when you have a bran muffin pasture, it's too hard to pick up the manure. So you have to harrow it. You have to drag it with some type of harrow to spread that manure around. And breaking it up and spreading it around spreads the nutrients. It keeps it so that the manure piles aren't suffocating the grass. When you do this, though, you have to be aware that you could potentially be spreading parasite eggs. So you do need to maintain a parasite management program on the advice of your veterinarian. What's standard practice for managing worms in horses is to do a fecal test to actually see what kind of worms that you have, and then deworming according to that. Hope that helps, Trish.
Okay. John asks, can you share the Bloomberg map diagram of land uses?
Yeah, sure, I'd be glad to do that. You want me to put that back up right now and they can take a screen?
That'd be great.
Would that make sense?
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And she can take a screenshot, or he can take a screenshot.
Oh, let's see. I think I closed it.
Where did you get that, Elaine? Did you get it from?
You won't believe it, but I got it from a golfing magazine, but it was a Bloomberg map.
Okay.
you know, as a golf magazine trying to show, you know, how golf courses are impacting the environment.
Yeah.
Okay, it's going to take me a second here to bring it back up because I already closed it. But so you can go ahead and give me the next question and then I'll
Okay.
bring that up.
All right. How can you prevent overgrazing like this if you are in a place like California where grass doesn't grow in the summer?
Yeah, so that's a problem for everybody, really. You can use a confinement area. In the enrichment lecture next, we're going to talk about track paddocks. You know, you might want to have a track paddock. Or you may just want to have a great big turnout area. It just depends, but you can't keep a horse out in an area that's overgrazed and intend for it to still be a pasture. But so you have to choose some other way to manage it. Okay, let's see. So I'm trying to share my screen again, and it's asking me a question. It's asking me who can start sharing. It's asking me advanced sharing options. Well,
oh, here we go.
Okay.
Yeah, there we go. You got it. Maybe it just took a while.
Okay. Let me go to that Bloomberg map. Oh, it was in the beginning. Let's see. Okay, there you can take a screenshot of it.
Yeah, great.
And let me see if I got any more specific information on that issue or where I got it. Which issue of the golf magazine.
Okay.
And you can give me the next question while I'm
all right.
looking.
What kind of grass seed that will provide grazing in a California clay soil? What kind of grass seed will provide grazing in a California soil? Can irrigate the soil?
My information is more general. So what I suggest is that you talk to, again, you got to talk to somebody local who can help you with, you know, climate and soils that are specific to your area. So again, talk to your RCD or to your extension office to find out what kind of grasses are going to work best in your area. And usually it's going to be a mix of like 3 or 4 species, because then you don't have a monoculture. And if anything happens, you'll have, you know, during a cool season, one might grow better, and during the hotter, drier season, another one might grow better. It's just going to be a lot more balanced that way for your pasture if you have a mix.
Mm-hmm. And John, I can be in touch with you about that too. Have some ideas for you there, since we're both Californians. Next question is, we recently tried the web soil survey and got the response, quote, no data for your area, unquote.
Oh my gosh.
I know. Have you ever run into that reply before? In other words, it could have been a temporary web glitch. We're in Central Oregon.
Yeah, that's interesting. As it's possible, you know, when I first started working this area like 30 years ago, there were areas that weren't mapped, but supposedly every place is mapped. But it's possible that they're not, or maybe some aspect of it was down on that day. But again, I would refer you back to your local RCD or extension office. So let me just say a little bit about that. So RCDs, they're called resource conservation districts in California. They're called soil and water conservation districts in Oregon. They're called conservation districts in Washington. But every county in the United States, even like in Guam and Alaska. They all have conservation districts. They're non-regulatory, non-enforcement. They're there to just provide education and technical assistance to you on a whole variety of natural resource issues. So they are just a gold mine of help, and they're going to be specific for your area, where I can give you like the big picture 30,000 feet view. They're going to give you the on the ground information about these kinds of things. So RCDs, and then your extension office, you can find these things by you doing an internet search. So put down your county and then say conservation district, and it'll help get you to your conservation district. Put down your county and say extension, and it should get you to your extension office for your county as well. Does that make sense, Terry?
Yep, that's perfect sense. And we'll also be having some folks from those agencies be speaking with us today, so that'll be great. Tie in perfectly. John asks again, is manure removed from the pastures after they come off of it from grazing?
No, you don't. You can't remove it when you have grass like in this picture here. You literally, there's no way to pick it up through all of the thick grass. So you harrow it to spread it out to balance those nutrients so that they're not all concentrated in one area, and so that they don't smother the grass plants. So you want to drag the manure so that it spreads it out in the pasture.
Okay. And then Allison asks, I assume recommending irrigation in places like California to continue growing grass all year?
What is the question again?
Well, she's kind of asking, do you irrigate in places like California to continue growing grasses all year?
Yeah, if irrigation is available to you, you do. And you have to, again, find out what's available and what the regulations are. And some places, using the water that's meant for your household is not regular, or it's not allowed, or it's not recommended for watering pastures. So you'll need to find out about that.
I might also add that, because we're in such a drought condition here in California, a lot of people are trying to move toward more native grasses, which do grow longer into the growing season. So that's another thing to consider. Next question is, why spread manure only during the growing season?
So that that's when the plants are going to be able to utilize it. So if you spread it during the winter or during the rainy season, then the plants can't use it, and it actually becomes a water quality issue, because it's going to get the nutrients and sediments that you want for your grass plants are going to get washed off and get into the surface waters and potentially cause problems.
Okay. Next question is, do you compost manure, and is that what you spread?
Yes, we recommend composting manure. We're not talking about that specifically today, but we can include handouts or references to where you can get more information on how to compost. And again, your local conservation district or extension office should be able to help you with that.
Next question is, are there places to find plans for building effective manure bins? Yeah.
The one handout that I have does have information on how to build a compost bin. Otherwise, I would say go to my website, and for all of these questions too, I would say go to the Horses for Clean Water website to see if any of the tip sheets that we've got available are going to be useful for you.
Yeah.
And then if you want to at any point, Terry, if we need to move on so that we don't.
Yeah.
go over.
Yeah, I think we're a little bit over time. There are a number of more questions, and both I and Elaine can stay on a little bit longer after the webinar if there's some of these questions that haven't been answered. Otherwise, I will save them and try to, in some way, respond to everybody's question at some point. So, should we just go ahead and move on then?
Sure.
And we'll get to these questions either a little bit or after the webinar.
Yeah, and Carrie just shared a link to conservation districts across the United States.
Oh, perfect. Great. Okay. I'll make sure everybody gets a copy of that. Okay. So I have a swale project that I was going to share a little bit of. See if I can share my screen. So I was just going to share, I'm going to try and make this as brief as I can because we're running a little bit over, but I wanted to share a little bit about swales and a project that I completed during the fall of 2020 that almost anyone can replicate for issues relating to erosion control, drought, or flooding. In this slide is a sketch of a swale, which is a simple ditch or trench dug on contour, which means that it's dug horizontally or level to the ground rather than, say, running perpendicular up and down a slope. A swale can be anywhere from a few inches to a few feet deep, and its purpose is to capture rainwater and in so doing to slow or pause the speed at which the water would otherwise run off the land. Instead, it will sink into the ground where it is naturally filtered, preventing erosion and flooding, and thereby the silting of streams and waterways. It will also water surrounding vegetation longer into the dry season and recharge groundwater. So for those of you who might not be familiar with the concept of swales, I'll show you just a few examples of some of the ways they can be used. The left-hand photo shows a swale being used as a plant bed to catch runoff from an impervious surface, in this case a parking lot. The right-hand photo shows a rock path with a swale dug underneath to catch water that will supply moisture to the plant beds on either side. So you wouldn't even know in this particular one that there's a swale underneath when walking on it. And here's another pathway that was dug out and then filled with wood chips in order to provide moisture to the plant beds on either side. Woody material is great to use as fill in a swale because when it rains, the wood swells with that moisture. And then as it dries, it shrinks as it releases water back into the soil, keeping it hydrated longer into the year and reducing the need for supplemental watering. And here's a swale used to capture water for a rain garden. And here are a series of swales filled with wood chips that I dug alongside 3 hedgerows in a side pasture that we use for an orchard and native edibles. It might be a little hard to tell in this photo, but the land slopes downward from the left side of the picture to the right. And when it rains, the swales catch the water and sink it farther into the soil where the trees and shrubs can make use of it. This then also prevents more runoff downslope. And so here I am with my shovel and my helper cat. And I should mention here that I was not in the habit of digging ditches. So when I began this project, I did just a little bit at a time over several weeks to give myself a chance to get over being intimidated by the idea, going at my own pace and working in short segments as time allowed. The beauty of digging a swale, though, is that it's very low tech, but highly effective. It was something I could do by myself using simple concepts. It cost me $0 and I found all needed materials on site. The only primary tool I used was a shovel, but I occasionally used a level and then briefly a wire cutter and pipe tape, which is shown in the photo on the right. I got away with beginning this project before the rains when the ground was hard because our soil is very sandy, so I was able to slice it out in small dry chunks. And so the type of soil that each of you have might determine what times of year you'd want to be doing something similar. So I live on a 6-acre small farm where we have grazed horses and more recently sheep, goats, and cattle. For my situation, the swales I've installed are part of a larger strategy to augment a broader, holistic grazing management plan that I coordinate with 3 other neighbors who have adjoining small farms. And as Elaine mentioned in her presentation, managing the grazing patterns of horses and other animals can be such an important and effective way for those of you who own or have access to land to grow quality soil and its ability to infiltrate water, sequester carbon, provide nutritious, high-quality forage that lasts longer into the growing season, and be more resilient during times of drought and flooding. At the same time, if you are living in a more urban or suburban area or have a horse facility without pasture, installing swales can be highly effective on their own. So my particular project was to capture and redirect all the water that runs off the side of our main barn roof during the rains in order to aid my broader efforts to stop water from running off the property in general. That section of roof is about 960 square feet, which means this roof sheds about 576 gallons of water with every inch of rainfall. So in a normal year of rain in my area, just this one section of roof can generate about 14,400 gallons of water per year. And I'll be sending you information on how to calculate those figures, by the way. So my plan was to continue to direct the water flowing off the roof into the downspout that you see in the right-hand photo, but that meant redirecting where that downspout took the water, which was currently running through underground pipes out to the driveway where it had been directed for the past 42 years. You can see the dark corrugated pipe at the bottom of the left-hand photo where water from the roof would gush out during the rains. And I'm including the second photo on the right, taken later at a different time of year, because I was hoping to better show the significant downslope of this property that runs to the road and how easily water could be carried off-site. Now, the grass will slow some of the flow from the drain pipe, but before our soil became more porous with improved management, that grass was not enough to keep all of that concentrated flow of water from sheeting over the surface and down into the street where it joined other runoff from neighboring properties and then picked up silt and toxins off the road before finding its way into the nearest creek, which for us is just down the street. So directly in front of the barn, you can see that there's a bed of dried out nasturtiums that died from lack of water. And so I decided to dig my swale here. One, because it was a convenient place to redirect the downspout coming off the barn roof, and because the water I captured there would water that nasturtium bed for me. I should mention that before digging, it's important to know where your existing underground pipelines are. And because I don't own this property, for me that meant involving the owner in those discussions and checking maps of water and gas lines. The second slide to the right shows the initial dig. I laid out tarps to make it easier to keep the soil in a neat pile and easier to clean up afterwards. I then disconnected the downspout from the old pipe that ran out to the driveway and attached a new length of corrugated pipe that I could direct into the swale, attaching the two using pipe wrap tape. And incidentally, I found this leftover corrugated pipe, which had been lying out behind the barn for 20 years. I also used a level to make sure that the bottom surface of this swale was level, so that when the water flowed into it, it would lie evenly throughout the entire length and not run out one side. And then at the end of the corrugated pipe, I found it and attached a length of drain pipe with holes. You can see an example of that on the top right-hand photo, to help evenly distribute the flow of water into the swale. This isn't really necessary, but since we also happen to have a small length of it lying around, I went ahead and made use of it. And then I wrapped that pipe with a fine mesh cloth to keep debris and soil particles from working their way into the holes and clogging it up, as you can see in the lower right-hand photo. And here's just a front shot giving you a complete idea of the project, how you can see how everything fits together. And some of you now might be questioning why water is being collected right alongside a building structure. So going back to this slide, there were actually several things that I did to prevent water damage and seepage inside the barn. First, you might have already noted that this is a small swale that is not anywhere large enough to hold all of the water that comes off this roof during a rainstorm. So I dug a secondary or overflow swale that I'll show you in a moment. But this was one of the ways that I prevented too much water building up around the barn itself. Secondly, you can see that the foundation of the barn to the right of the swale is set above ground, and that the swale, while not deep, is dug below that foundation. So once again, preventing water from pooling up against the siding. And then finally, as I mentioned before, I was working with sandy soil that drains relatively rapidly, so I could feel confident that there would be no standing water even at the bottom of the swale. Whereas if you're dealing with clay or adobe soil that holds a lot of moisture and tends to pool up, having a swale that close to a building is probably not the right choice for you, and in that case would mean redirecting the downspout further away. So then I filled the swale in with woody material we had on hand from tree trimmings that we had chipped into a pile. But if we don't happen to have them on hand, if I hear the sound of a chipper when the county prunes back trees and shrubs in the neighborhood, I'm often running out down the street to talk to the work crews, because many times they're happy to have a place to dump their loads. And so if you happen to live in an area where this kind of thing takes place, it can be useful to get to know your local crews. But if you don't have wood chips on hand, you can use any type of woody plant trimmings to fill a swale. You can see that in the left-hand photo, where I top those wood chips off with finer clippings from my own hand prunings. And I should mention that it's important to really pack that material in by walking back and forth on top of it to ensure that the sides of the swale don't collapse or erode. And so after filling the swale, I covered it with several inches of the same soil that I had dug out, and I topped that off with a layer of compost that I then reseeded. And on the right, you can see what that dried out bed of nasturtiums looked like the following spring. So as I mentioned, that first swale alongside the barn was not large enough to hold all the rainwater flowing off the roof. So I dug a secondary swale downslope, and here is that same swale, just different shot showing it next to the garden bed that it will be feeding. This soil happened to be very rocky, so I ended up sifting out the rocks and placing them at the bottom of the swale, which would aid in filtration and then make the remaining rock-free soil better suited for topping and reseeding, as you'll see in a moment. So that first slide to the left shows the connecting channel from the smaller swale to the larger one, and the second slide shows the formula that I roughly followed to make sure that the overflow from the first swale would run seamlessly through the channel and into the second swale. The picture on the right is showing that the first swale is level, and before the water fills up to the top, it will flow down a 4-inch drop indicated at the bottom, and it's important to make that drop into a subsequent channel at least 4 inches to ensure that the water does not backflow over the sides of the initial swale. So now obviously the connecting channel on the left needs to be at a downslope from the top swale in order for the water to flow into the overflow swale. I was not exact about the degree of slope in the connecting channel, and for a project like this you really don't need to be, but it's ideal to have a gradual slope that keeps the water flowing but not gushing. And I used the level you see lying in the middle of the connector channel just to make sure that I was digging in a continuous downslope. Here is the connector channel and second swales filled with wood chips. And here is what it looks like when the project was completed. And after it had been covered with the soil and reseeded. And then this is just a shot from the front showing the barn and this initial swale on the left side of the photo, and the overflow swale on the right of the photo, but to the upside of the garden bed to the right. And so in conclusion, as I mentioned in the beginning, the purpose of this project was to augment what the land itself was already becoming capable of doing because of implementing better grazing practices over the previous several years. And this was the first rainy season that our land has been able to infiltrate all of the rainwater that fell onto the property, which meant that we had no runoff for the first time since the current owners purchased this land over 40 years ago. So what that actually means is that after 20 or more inches of rain that we've had so far this year, we've been able to sink well over 3 million gallons of rainwater on our 6 acres, which is the equivalent of about 1,600 2,000-gallon water cisterns. And this photo just gives you an idea of how many that is. That was a great relief after watching some of our neighbors truck in water because their wells had gone dry. And then this last photo shows how dry our property looks like in late summer, early fall. My town of Petaluma is a high-risk fire area, while parts of it are also a flood zone. And the point that I really want to stress is that even in arid places, more rainwater falls than we actually use. And yet everywhere we are depleting our rivers and lakes and underground aquifers that supply us with fresh water. And/or we are experiencing more flooding because we have managed our lands in such a way as to limit its capacity to infiltrate adequate rainwater. So I'm hoping that this leaves you all with some good food for thought. And with that, I will conclude the share. Oh, there you are, Elaine.
Yeah, it let me click on all of a sudden.
That's awesome.
So should I go ahead and share my presentation, or do you want to take a break?
Sure. Let's see, we are a little bit over. We could take maybe just a 3-minute bio break, do you think, for people? Or
Sure.
Do you want to just go right? I mean, it's fine with me either way.
3 minutes sounds fine. I'll get this queued up.
Okay, all right, we'll take a 3-minute bio break and then be back at 11:20.
Okay, it's on the screen, right, Terry?
It is on the screen.
Okay.
And I think we had a few more questions coming in too. I'll just take a peek. David says your reply to his Boeing question was super duper.
Okay, great. So I've got about 45 minutes now, right?
Okay, yep, you do.
All right, so I'll go ahead and get started then, I think. Does that sound right?
Yep, that sounds good.
Okay. All right, so hopefully everybody can see the screen. So what we're going to talk about now is equine enrichment. And that is kind of a buzzword that people might be hearing. It's looking at ways to provide more stimulation in a horse's environment. so that we benefit their psychological as well as physical well-being. And I think most of us horse people already know that horses are smart. And we've been saying that all along our whole horse lives. But now we're starting to see so much scientific information and research that confirms this. So that we definitely need to keep what's called equine welfare in mind when we're confining our horses. Let's see. So confinement areas. So what we're going to be talking about here, we're going to be talking about what constitutes a good equine welfare in confinement areas. We're going to be talking about different ways to stretch out their grazing opportunities and their eating opportunities with slow feeders. And then we're going to be talking about track paddocks and unique designs for confinement areas. The funny thing is that it doesn't want to control my clicks for moving forward very well. Okay, so as we talked about in the pasture management class, at certain times of the year, particularly the winter, we have to use a confinement area. So it might be to keep our horses from getting overweight in the summer. It might be to keep our pastures from getting overgrazed in the summer. It might be in the wintertime when our soils are soggy and our plants are dormant. But we're going to need to utilize the confinement area. And that's because the pounding hooves and will compact the wet soils, and they'll suffocate the plant roots and create more mud for us. So poorly managed confinement areas can be become muddy and unhealthy for horses. And it can start having horse health issues like diseases and parasites, and picking up parasites and pathogens. So some of the issues that we might start experiencing are like horses ingesting mud when they're eating on the ground, or chore efficiency, or they can develop diseases like white line disease or thrush, like you might see on the bottom right-hand side. And then there's the welfare issue that comes with poorly designed confinement areas. You know, these are just not good for horses mentally or physically, and there's many issues that come into play when we see horses confined like this. And then for natural resource agencies, our concern is the runoff and erosion from poorly managed confinement areas. So instead, equine enrichment is looking at ways to provide a better welfare for our horses, for not only their physical well-being, but as well as psychological well-being. So what I'm going to talk about, hey, and Terry, maybe you want to put your mic on mute. So I'm picking up those clicks. So what we're going to talk about is managing confinement areas. We're going to talk about different sizes and shapes for confinement areas. We're going to talk about ways to maximize interactions. We're going to talk about different kinds of food and feeding options. We're going to talk about rolling and scratching areas, toys, friends, turnout, and exercise. Okay, so first, let's talk about managing a confinement area. So in a confinement area, when you're setting up a confinement area, for those who don't have one, what you want to do is start out with a high, well-drained, convenient location. So when it's high and well-drained, then you're going to be less likely to get mud. and less likely to get erosion. Then you want to pick up manure regularly. And in my composting and manure management classes, we can talk about other options for managing manure along with composting. You want to use footing to reduce mud and erosion. So different kinds of footing options, and we'll talk about that a little bit. You want to install gutters and downspouts. They're one of the first things you want to do for any confinement area, no matter where you live. Like we live in the desert here, and we only get like 7 to 14 inches of rain a year, but it's still a lot of water that comes off of a roof, and it can make a huge difference if you do or don't have gutters and downspouts. And then we'll talk briefly about managing surface flows. So here's some examples of confinement areas that, or an example of a confinement area. And you can see how it has a gradual slope to help so that you're not pooling water in your confinement area. And it's surrounded by a buffer of pasture. And the pasture acts as biofiltration to pick up any runoff that would come off of your confinement area, runoff of just water that the plants can utilize, as well as nutrients and sediments from manure and urine, which the plants can utilize. And the next thing is you want to pick up manure. I suggest that you pick it up at least every 3 days, and that's to break that parasite reinfestation cycle. So some species of worms can hatch as frequently as every 3 days. So if you pick up manure at least every 3 days, it's going to help break that cycle. But picking up more frequently is even better for reducing mud and for being chore efficient. So if it's not too hard, it's good to pick up manure at least once a day. Some of my friends pick up manure twice a day. And one of the reasons why we want to pick up manure is to reduce mud. This is a place that I was at that had created a really nice confinement area for their horses, and they had put in nice crushed rock footing. And I came back a month later and they had not picked up manure once. And so all that manure is just going to turn into mud, and then they've lost all that expensive and nice footing as a result of that. So you want to use a footing product in your confinement areas, as well as your high traffic areas. So high traffic areas are in front of gates and in walkways, in front of stalls, doorways. So the types of footings that you can use include different types of crushed rock. And the types of crushed rock that you can use are going to be different for each area of the country, and it depends on what's going to be available in your area. In this picture here on the left, this is called 5/8 crushed rock, and the one on the right is coarse washed arena sand. Sand is a great footing. Horses like it. They like to roll in it. They like to sleep in it. It's even easier, I think, to pick up manure in the wintertime with sand than it is with gravel. When it's frozen, it's still difficult to pick up anything in a frozen environment. But sand, you don't quite get the hills and valleys that you can potentially get with gravel, and you want to avoid picking up as much as the footing product as possible. With sand, and really with gravel as well, you want to be sure that it's not tracked into the eating areas. Let me explain about the 5/8 a little bit. So what that means is that it's crushed to the size of 5/8 of an inch would be the biggest pieces of material, and then the smallest is called the minus. So that's just the name for it. It means it goes from 5/8 inch down to the sand sized particles. But you can get 5/8 washed or clear where it's all that size. Generally speaking, I would say anything over about that over that size is less comfortable for a horse to stand on. I mean, we do have some paddocks that have 1-inch gravel in it, and those horses seem to be fine with it. But I have also had situations where horses were not comfortable with that big, and you want to go down to something smaller, like 1/2 inch in size. Just to show you that horses really like sand a lot. And when you have sand footing, you want to make sure that your horses, or any kind of gravel product, you want to make sure that your horses are not eating in it, so they're not ingesting the sand. We sweep our stalls once a day, and then we feed using feeders where they can still eat with their heads down, which is important for the way horses are designed by nature. They need to eat with their heads down to drain their respiratory system. But those feeders then help eliminate the chance of horses ingesting the sandy soil particles. Another example of a footing product that you could use would be stall mats. And in this particular situation, they've framed them in so they're not going to migrate. And they have them in the highest traffic area, and she sweeps them like once a day. And they help a lot with reducing mud. So gutters and downspouts are one of the most important things for mud management in your confinement areas. And the reason why is you want to be thinking of that rainwater that falls from the sky as clean rainwater, and not allowing that to get contaminated with mud and manure in the confinement area. So you want to capture that clean rainwater and divert it to someplace else in your property. Like the example that Terry was showing, where she's diverting it to swale and basically putting it back into the natural hydrology of her property instead of letting it run off and escape. She's conserving the water. So paddock shape and design. So your confinement areas, the sky's the limit really. And what you want to do is think about changing things so that you're stimulating the horse and providing more options. So one thing that we'll talk about here is track paddocks, and I'll explain that in just a second. But this is a track paddock right here in the lower right. But these other two designs also have some unique aspects to them. So the top left-hand side, she uses panels, and the beauty of panels is that you can move them around and reshape the size of your pens. She has each of her ponies in an individual pen so that she can monitor their food and water uptake and their manure to make sure that they're healthy. And then she has a group confinement area that she uses for her ponies. In the wintertime, it's an arena so that the pastures don't get destroyed. In the summertime, it's a pasture. In the bottom, the right-hand picture, that's actually the Seattle Mounted Police. And their horses all have stalls indoors as well as individual turnouts outdoors. And they're only in the turnouts for a period of the day, like 6 hours or so. But it's changing things up and allowing for outdoor air and change of scenery. The track paddock on the left-hand side in this picture is at our place that we created it. We had big turnout areas that we're kind of using as confinement areas, and they were just so big that the horses really weren't using them. So we wanted to create a track paddock to try to encourage them to move more and move around and kind of change things up. So here's another example for a design for a paddock. This is another one of our big confinement areas, and it's actually too big to put footing in the whole thing. It would be not cost effective for us to put footing in the entire paddock. So in the wintertime, what we do is actually put a couple of strands up of hot tape, And we just make the paddock much smaller, and we confine the 2 horses in that paddock to one end, because we have clay soils and they're really difficult to manage unless in the wintertime, unless you have footing on it and pretty deep. Here's another idea for confinement areas, changing things up. So this is a therapeutic riding facility that has quite a few horses there, and they all have stalls and are stalled at night, but then they all get turned out every day into their confinement areas. You can see it has a slope, and in the middle, I mean at the bottom, which is actually there's another row to the right hand side of shelters and confinement areas. It's all grassy in the middle, so that area helps to absorb the runoff from these confinement areas. Here's another example for a commercial facility. This is in Redmond, Washington, and this is actually the Park District has confinement areas, or has a horse program. And they do this cool thing where they have this confinement. These are stalls, basically, they're large stalls for the horses. I personally like these a lot. They're a lot more natural because you've got good ventilation. The horses can see, they can see each other. And then their turnout area is actually within this whole big pen. So they can open it up and the horses can have turnout in this area, or they can use them in their program elsewhere, wherever they're utilizing them. But it's a good use of space, and it also allows them to have be able to monitor their food and water intake and their manure to make sure that they're healthy. And it's cost effective too. You don't have to have a big barn. I think this is probably healthier than a big barn in many cases. Here's another example of a confinement area. In this case, he shaped his confinement area so that he can use it as an arena. So it doubles as his round pen and arena. And he actually closes his horses out of the stall during the day, and they are in their confinement area. He has pastures too that he utilizes in the growing season. So track paddocks, let's talk a little bit about track paddocks. They are really popular. People really like the idea of track paddocks a lot. So basically, this was an idea that was created by Jamie Jackson. He wrote a book called Paddock Paradise, A Guide to Natural Horse Sporting. And he was like a barefoot farrier, and he studied mustangs, wild horses out west, and came up with the idea that really what's going to be best is not so much pasture as it is the opportunity for horses to move and move around and seek out forage, not just have it in front of them like a smorgasbord all the time, but to have the opportunity to seek out forage. Here's information about Jamie Jackson and his book. So he was in, I believe it was Colorado, and that you can see his property on the right-hand side. That's what it looked like. You know, he wasn't going to be able to grow pasture like you can in places like the Pacific Northwest. So that's how he came up with this idea. And what he did was, in his track was big and round, and around like 12-foot wide track around that circle. And then he had feeding stations where he had hay nets on T-posts. You can see it in the background. And the horses never knew where the feeding station was going to be for each day. He'd bring them in at night and then let them back out into the track during the day. All right. So here's some examples of track paddocks. The first thing that I might mention, it's going to depend how you set up and where you put your track paddock and how you design it is going to depend on so many things for your property. It's going to depend on how much land you have, what kind of soil you have, and I'll kind of summarize this in a slide as we go along. But in this situation, this gentleman had a small piece of property. It was like 2.5 acres, I believe it was. And he had a driveway in his property from the front to the back. And he didn't really have that much pasture. He had just small grazing areas. So what he did was he took his driveway and turned that into his track paddock. It wasn't circular, it was just long and narrow, but it still gives the horses a change of scenery, and gets them moving around and gets them seeing and experiencing different things. This is probably the coolest track paddock, or one of the coolest I've seen. I see some cool ones on Facebook too. This track paddock, so this gal bought a 5-acre piece of property, and when she got on it, she realized, she probably maybe hadn't looked at the web soil survey beforehand. And had she looked at it, she would have seen that her soil was all rocky. And she made the best lemonade out of lemons with her property. She created a small scale trail course, which is something else that I teach about in my classes. And she created a track paddock. So her track paddock is here. It's around the perimeter of this white circle, and it goes around her small scale trail course right in here, and her outdoor arena and her shop. And let's see, the next picture shows you some different scenes of her track paddock going around the outside. And hot tape is great to use for track paddocks because it has so much flexibility. Usually you want to have some kind of permanent fencing around the perimeter so that you know that there's not going to be any breakouts and that the horses are going to be contained. She has a variety of footings. She has a variety of elevations. It goes up, it goes down, changes scenery. Here's another track paddock. These guys had curlies, which are always fun to see. They look like a cross between a sheep and a horse. And they had 20 acres, and their track paddock was like figure 8 shaped. It went around the perimeter of 2 pastures, I guess you would say. So in the bottom photo, that's the track there, as well as top left, that's the track, and top right. Here's another track paddock. This is at a hunter jumper facility, and she took what had been her big confinement area for the winter, her winter confinement area, and she just made it into a track with a fence around the interior so that it's round and encourages the horses to move along the track. Here's a picture of it. Here's another cool facility. So she did, she only has, gosh, it's about 5 acres, I think, 5, maybe a couple more acres than that, in a very populated area. So what she wanted to do was put in an arena, and she could only afford an outdoor arena. So she made it as well draining as possible so that she could use it as much of the year. And as she was putting it in, she realized that she had sort of created a track around the perimeter of her outdoor arena. So she has stalls in that little red barn there. And then she has taken that track and retrofitted that path. She retrofitted the path into making it a track around her arena. So here's more pictures of that. And so since she was retrofitting it, she had to do certain things to like make it safe around corners and edges so that horses didn't get trapped there or caught in anything. But it works out super well for her. So here's our property, just to give you a little more idea about our track paddocks. So track paddocks can be any size, and I'm not sure how big this area is, maybe a quarter of an acre, the whole area, but we just use temporary fencing and fenced off the inside. That's a view of it beforehand. And we had this great big area. It was a lot of work. I guess it still is the same amount of work to pick up manure and the whole thing, but they just weren't using it. It was just kind of silly to have this great big turnout area and have the horses just hang out in one area. So what we did was we fenced it off with hot tape. We put down compost. We seeded it with drought tolerant grass because we can't irrigate it where it is. It only gets water at this time of the year when it rains. And then that's what it looks like now. It's been a struggle because it sat dormant for so many years. It was collected weed seeds. So we've been trying to remove the weed seeds and plant in drought tolerant grasses as well as native plants. And that's pretty much what it looks like most of the year. But the reason why I like it as a track is because it psychologically encourages movement. If you are familiar with Temple Grandin, you know that animals tend to move counterclockwise, and you can do certain things then to encourage them to do that. Like we have a hillside on one side, so they might want to be curious to go up to see what's going on in the other next door property, or we can put feeding stations in different points or other objects to encourage them to move. So there's many ways that you might be able to come up with a track on your property. If you've got a farm road or a path, like in these situations, you might be able to turn them into a track. So this was in the upper left was in Kentucky, and in Kentucky they have it's traditional there to put a space between pastures so that horses can't touch nose to nose. Well, that track, that space there could easily become a track paddock. Lower right-hand side, that was another big horse facility I saw that had a maintenance road around the perimeter of their pasture. And I was thinking it's perfect track paddock. Same with the one, with the picture on the left. She was putting in a pasture and an arena, and I suggested to her to have a track around the outside, and then in the wintertime or whenever she can utilize that track, and her horse has a great big area to move around in. So here's some considerations for making a track paddock, and I'll send you a handout on this that will summarize it all. But basically, a track is going to work best on well-drained soils. Even where we live in the wintertime with that clay soil, we can't use the whole track on our turnout. I mean, we're in the desert, but the clay soils, if it's raining, they just don't work very well. So you want to think about the land that you've got available. Maybe you want to shape the track to fit around your barn or your buildings or your arena or the perimeter of your property. You got to think about the age, the number of horses, their breed, their temperaments. The narrower the track, the more a horse is going to be likely to move. And the wider it is, the more it's going to become a loafing area. So you just use those ideas to encourage or discourage where you want them to hang out. Additional movement is encouraged with feeding or watering stations along the way, or other stimulus like poles to step over or walk over. The bigger your track, the more maintenance it's going to require. So you got to think about that. If you make a great big huge track, you're going to spend a lot more time picking up manure in it, or putting down footing in the muddy spots, or doing fencing. Other considerations might be seasonal use. I mean, maybe you can only use your track during the dry seasons, but that's something. So here's a couple of other examples, or one other example, I guess, of a track. This is where we live. I don't know these people, but I've driven by and have noticed their track paddock. And this is to show you what it's like with clay soil. You just can't use it in the wintertime because you sink into it. You know, even if you're walking on foot, you sink in quite a bit and it all sticks to your feet. So I noticed that they only use it in the dry season, but fortunately we have quite a bit of that here. So they are able to get a good use of it. Okay, here's my next equine enrichment idea, and that's to maximize interaction opportunities. So there's many ways you can do this. We have a round pen that we put in, and we didn't really think about it that much, but we put it in a great spot because it's kind of next to the neighbors. And so there's a lot of stimulation from that. There's lots of things going on there, people mowing, kids playing. So all that kind of thing is going on. Plus the horses are, the rest of our horses are on either side. And we use that round pen for starting young horses, or we do a lot of work with Mustangs. And so it's 6 foot tall, and you need that, you're required to have that for if you want to adopt a Mustang. But the location is perfect because we're walking by all the time. There's traffic from us, there's traffic from our neighbors, and there's our horses on both sides. So there's lots of stimulation and things going on. The bottom right-hand side just shows a picture of a horse property. So when she's home, she's just got stall guards on her stalls. So she's encouraging the horses to stick their heads out and interact with people there. And again, that's more enrichment. So as far as designs for barns, I like to, again, encourage as much openness as possible. As a horse is designed, their respiratory system is like their Achilles heel. So as good a ventilation as possible is important. Being closed in a barn is tough on a horse's respiratory system with ammonia and dust and mold. So this is perfect for that, as well as for providing stimulation, allowing them to see each other, touch noses, groom each other. So it's very friendly for horses. And when we get new horses in here, they are relaxed right away and happy with that opportunity to be near each other. Here's another design the same way, with the same thoughts in mind, that they can see, smell, touch, hear each other. So studies show grooming, when they're able to groom each other, is really important. And we all know how social horses are, and they need that grooming to form a bond. So as much as they can be allowed to do that is great. Here's another open air design that I think is beneficial. If you do have to have horses in stalls indoors, again, as much openness as possible is important. If you think about the old days, for some reason, I don't know why, but we all horse people thought that they had to be closed in stalls. So they were completely closed off all the way around. They couldn't see, smell, or touch their neighbors. And here, maybe they can't groom each other, but at least they can see and smell each other, and they can stick their heads and necks out and interact with humans. Okay, foods and feeding options. As much as possible, horses are designed by nature, again, to be eating almost all the time. Like research shows us 18 to 20 hours a day is what horses would eat if they were left to their own devices. So what that means for us is that we want to provide them with small, frequent meals. So at our place at Sweet Pepper Ranch, we feed 3 times a day. And for horses that can tolerate it weight-wise, we actually provide free choice feeding of lower quality, lower sugar hay. But other options are try food seeking. There's research from Australia that shows that horses might be more browsers than we actually think of them as being. So if you can try edible plants like willows or cottonwoods or bamboo or blackberry, maybe give them a couple of branches or vines a day or every other day, something like that. Some people have, I don't think I have a picture of it, but they have like an umbrella stand where they have a piece of PVC pipe strapped in a corner, and then they'll stick in a couple of willows or blackberry vines into that stand for what we call a food station. And they have them in different areas. They don't always feed them just in one area, because again, that's mimicking what's natural for a horse, is to seek food and to move around. You can also try different food types, like maybe you put hay cubes in some kind of feeder in a different spot on their in their confinement area for some chew time, or you have low quality hay or low sugar hay. Like we have tough hay, particularly for our Mustangs that get overweight fast. We have tough hay, and we try to provide that to them for free choice feeding. So other treats that you might be able to offer your horses at times are like watermelon, plums without the pit, bananas. It's crazy, but bananas, horses like bananas, skin and all. Grapes, celery, orange pumpkins, and then there's slow feeders like on the left-hand side here. So we'll talk about slow feeders next. So there's all different kinds of slow feeders. The caveat that you want to think about first is that you want to make sure there's no parts to the slow feeders that are going to damage their teeth or mouth. Like in the beginning, we horse people in general used metal slow feeders, and those were unnaturally wearing down their teeth and can potentially cut their lips. So you want to make sure that there's no parts that are going to be hard on their mouth. So slow feeders offer restricted yet free choice forage for the horse, and they mimic natural grazing. And they allow for longer grazing opportunities. And there's lots of scientific research that shows that they reduce stress, they reduce boredom, they reduce ulcers. So let me show you some different examples of what you can use for a slow feeder. So you can use a hay net. You can double bag a hay net. Usually you want to hang the feeders so that they're low down, so that again the horse is eating with its head and its neck down, so that they can drain their respiratory system. You just want to make sure that they don't have some part that the horse is going to get stuck in. Like if they have shoes, you want to make sure they're not going to step on the feeder and get their horse shoe stuck in it. There's so many brands of slow feeders. Some of the ones that I've seen successfully used are Nibble Nuts. They're a good brand. Hay Chicks is quite popular. I see that in California quite a bit. It's got a opening that you can just slide the hay into, and then it's a hay net basically. And this is a case where we put the hay net over a feeder so that the feeder can collect the little pieces that fall out. The Kentucky Horse Park, I noticed last time we were there that they have slow feeders for all of their horses there. Porta grazers are quite popular and are well thought of. So again, it's plastic, so it's not metal like the kind that can cut their lips, but the horses have to pull the hay out of those openings. Nag bags, quite popular. So NAG stands for Natural Alternative to Grazing. These are nag bags that we had guests using at our place. That's a nag bag there that they've tied into a feeder so that it kind of keeps it from getting dirty or the hay from spilling around as much. That's a close-up of the nag bag. When the bag breaks, she also fixes it with baling twine because they do wear out. Here's another kind. I don't think this one was a nag bag, but it's a big hay net that can go around. I'm not sure what the brand is, but it's basically a big hay net that goes around a round bale. And then the horses can just seek out the hay there. And because it's kind of restricted, it slows them down a little bit. There's different kinds of automatic feeders too. This is a type of automatic feeder that feeds up to, I think it was 5 or 6 times a day. It can either be grain or supplements or pelleted hay, or it can be hay. And it's set on a timer, and then it just sends it out, drops it down into the feeder over time. Okay, so let's talk about rolling and scratching. This is so important. We all know how itchy horses can be, but that ability to roll and scratch is really important for equine welfare, as well as it is for enrichment and making for happy horses. And there's many different ways that you can provide opportunities for horses. There's different things that you can buy. The one on the upper left is actually called an itchy thing. I think that's the name of the brand. We made one just with buying a plastic doormat and then bolting it onto the wall. It's not quite as durable, and it breaks down after a year or so. But I've also seen people use the street sweeper things. When those wear out, I've seen people get those for free from, you know, this county or the city, and then just slide them over a post in the ground, kind of like the post here. They just have slid it over it, and then it's just a giant itching post. Sand piles, you know, say you have gravel in most of your paddock, maybe you can dump a sand pile in one end and they can use it for rolling that way. Here's another example where they've, 2 different examples where they've put a sand pile in a gravel paddock. Horse toys, this is another way you can add enrichment to your confinement areas. There's so many different kinds of toys. The research shows that the ones that are most successfully used are the ones that have food in them. Although, boy, my one Mustang, we had some obstacles in the arena. It doesn't really matter what obstacles we put out there. She goes and plays with everything and chews them up and drags them all around. Here's some other toys. This is a reflective surface that's not going to break. There's hanging toys, licking toys. How about this? I see this picture all over the internet. This is my friend's place, and she has track paddocks. Her track paddocks actually have some grass in them. And she can close or open her track paddocks up, but the way that her horses have to get from one side to another is to jump over barrels, and the barrels will roll so that if the horses hit them, it's not going to be dangerous. But that's just another equine enrichment opportunity. She also, the same friend, Heather, she actually has obstacle courses in her track paddocks that she rides on, but then there are also enrichment opportunities for the horses that are confined in those tracks. Just some examples. This is a big, another friend of mine, this is her confinement area for her horse. It's like a big stall, and she's got different kinds of obstacles and toys in it for her horse. Okay, friends. So horses are social animals, they're herd animals. They bond really well to other species if they don't have horses or pasture mates. So your horses, if you don't want to get another horse, they might like some other kind of equine or goats. They bond so well with goats. And that's a traditional thing as well. I've seen horses over the years adopt so many kinds of companions, especially horses that were living by themselves. Okay, winter turnout and exercise opportunities. So the winter time is more of a struggle for all of us who experience real winter. If you can't ride, if you can still groom, that grooming is so important for horses, for their welfare. And also maintaining good hoof care is important, but maybe you can hand walk them or lunge them or start doing liberty work. But you want to plan to exercise and interact with your horse a minimum 30 minutes a day, 3 times a week. It's kind of like what doctors say people need for as far as exercise, a minimum of 30 minutes, 3 times a week. Other turnout ideas, if your horses are by themselves, maybe you can turn them out with other horses. Maybe you can utilize a dry lot on your property for turnout, or an outdoor arena or a round pen. And maybe that's where they can go to play and just be a horse with the others. And then groundwork is so important. We've become big fans of trail courses and different kinds of trail obstacles. And we do a lot of that in hand as well as under saddle. And then, of course, if you are doing pasture management, if you can do rotational grazing, that will help with managing metabolic horses and keeping your horses from becoming fat. And there's just so much information available that is showing us that we can help prevent things like stereotypical behavior like weaving and cribbing if we can break up their days and provide different stimulation for them. And happy horse keeping. All right, so I've got some resources listed here that we talked about in the last lecture. And then here's the QR code if you'd like to sign up to be on our newsletter, or if you want to go to the website and check out some of the other resources that we've got available. So Terry?
Yes, ma'am.
I'll go back to you and our other speakers.
Okay, sounds good. There have been some questions coming in. I've been answering what I could.
Okay, great.
And then do you want to just save the rest for the end?
Well,
maybe
we better, I think.
Yeah, because we're a bit over time.
Yeah, and we still want to we want people to learn about the RCDs and.
Yeah. So in that case, our next speaker is Lori Tall from the San Francisco Bay Regional Water Quality Control Board. Lori, are you there?
I'm here. Can you hear me?
Awesome. Yes, can see you and hear you. Yay.
Okay. So I also have a short presentation. I will attempt to share my screen real quick here.
Okay. Oh, it's working.
Yay. Okay. Everybody can see that?
Looks good.
And I'm gonna make sure I can see my notes. All righty. So, hello, I'm Lori Tall, and I know this presentation is very narrow to our area. There are lots of folks on this webinar from all different states, but some of this information is probably relevant in your state as well. I'm with the state agency called the State Water Resources Control Board in California, and every state has a similar agency, probably with similar requirements, implementing some of the same laws and regulations. So, so it might be familiar to you and informative. So we are going to talk mostly about new requirements for local folks in the Petaluma River watershed, but also to remind others in other watersheds in our region about what we require when it comes to water quality. So quickly, I have about 15 minutes with a lot to cover, but we're going to cover who the water boards are, what our requirements are for horse boarding operations, and what a ranch plan is, and what are the next steps coming in the next year or two. So to start off, like I said, we are part of the State Water Resources Control Board, and our agency has different divisions for different water issues. We have a division of water rights, a division of water quality, which is what our agency is under, and also a division of drinking water. The State Water Resources Control Board Division of Water Quality is split up into 9 different regions in the state. And I am part of the San Francisco Bay region, and this is a map. It might be a little hard to see, but our region, the regions are separated into watersheds. So it depends, everything that drains towards the San Francisco Bay or the ocean in these areas are our jurisdiction. We implement federal, state, and local requirements, and those requirements all have specific language for confinement facilities. And in addition to ag-related sources, of course, our agency implements programs for all different other industries, such as construction, industrial stormwater issues, landfills, sewage treatment plants, groundwater remediation, and wetland protection. So just to start off and like kind of a little overview of why our agency regulates or has requirements for horse boarding operations. So the Federal Clean Water Act requires states to assess all of our waterways and determine if standards are being met. And if they're not being met, we have to come up with solutions to fix them, to fix the problems that are causing those impairments. So those solutions are called our types of water quality pollution prevention programs called total maximum daily loads. And in these plans, we examine the problems, identify the sources of pollutants, and then we come up with actions to restore the clean water. So in our region, we have about 21 completed TMDLs, and 6 of those have identified horses as one of the sources of the pollution. And it's for pollution attributed to bacteria. And all of the commercial horse boarding operations in the first 4 watersheds on this slide, Napa River, Tamales Bay, San Pedro Creek, and also the San Vicente Creek, they're currently under our general permit for confinement facilities. And the facilities in the Petaluma River watershed, the TMDL program for that river watershed is requiring those facilities also comply with this permit. So that's why we're talking about it today. Here's just a little overview of the Petaluma River watershed. During our sampling program of the river, concentrations in this river for bacteria exceeded the recreational uses by up from 67% up to 100% higher than the standard. So this is a reason why we're addressing it and having to come up with solutions. Animal facilities are just one of the sources, of course, of this bacterial problem. But and we have different programs addressing all those different sources. We're talking about animals today. So this is just want to give you a quick little view. So in case you're in that watershed, if your facility can kind of see where you are, we have a small group of people in this webinar that are in this watershed, but you might be able to identify if this applies to you. So when we did our investigation for the sources of bacteria in this river, we did conduct microbial source tracking, which is a fairly new method that can identify fecal bacteria hosts by looking at certain DNA markers. And we conducted 2 rounds of sampling, one during the wet season and one during the dry season. And this chart summarizes those findings. And as you can see, the wet season, there's a significant tie to the rainy season for certain areas or certain types of bacteria. And horse, surprisingly, was one of the highest indicators. for this particular watershed. So in order to address these kinds of problems, and in our whole region, we have two different programs. We have a program for animal grazing, which applies to mostly cattle grazing, and it's a conditional waiver that has certain requirements for these watersheds that are listed here. And we're going to be adding in the Petaluma River watershed, of course. And then we have a general permit for confined animal facilities, which we've mostly applied. It mostly applies in the past to our dairy programs. We have about 40 dairies in our region, since 2016, we've also the horse facilities have also fallen under this program because of the TMDL program. So we apply this order to all dairies and then also to all non-dairy confinement facilities that are just within the TMDL watersheds, the watersheds that have identified animals as one of the potential sources of bacterial pollution. So I just want to go over real quick what the general requirements of this permit are. And these are very general topics, which go into much more detail in our order and just in the requirements of what you need to do. But in general, these are them. It requires you to divert clean stormwater away from your confined areas. It requires you to contain your manure bedding and also to control the stormwater that contacts those areas. So it might be like we've been talking about already, directing it to a place where it can filtrate down and sink or filtrate through vegetative filter strips, but you need to somehow manage that stormwater. Also, you need to apply waste at appropriate rates for soils and crops and not provide an area where when it does rain, wherever you do apply it or spread it in your pasture lands, that it discharges to surface waters. And you can't, there are certain rules for stockpiling and where you can do it and how close you are to a waterway. In the confined areas, we have a lot of facilities, especially dairies, that are built within some very hilly areas where creeks run right through the facility. So one of the requirements is that animals, of course, have to be fenced out of the creeks when you're in the confined area. You must contain all non-storm water and other wastes, and you must manage your grazing lands to reduce bacteria and sediment runoff. So also a requirement of the permit is that you have to put together a ranch water quality plan. And this is basically a plan that demonstrates how your facility meets the requirements of the permit, either in a structural way or just operationally with your management practices. And you're able to prepare your own management plan, or we do recommend getting assistance from your local RCD or NRCS. And Carrie and Brooke are going to talk about that after my presentation about what they offer as far as services. And this plan should include, or must include, a map of your facility, implementation plan for improvements, and also a description of your management practices in your confined areas for your waste, your grazing lands, and your land application. Another component of the permit is a monitoring program. And this monitoring program, it sounds a little onerous, but it's meant to be a simple way to just make sure that, and to kind of do a little checkup and make sure that the management practices that you're implementing on your facility are working. So the permit requires visual inspections and also to do a simple water sampling program during three storm events a year. You have the option to do your own sampling or to join maybe a watershed group that you and other areas have done this, where they have a few different sampling points in the stream that will capture the runoff from multiple ranches. That's an option. And if you're doing your own sampling on your own ranch, if you have 2 good years of results and data, then you can request to have a reduction in that requirement. So if you are in this watershed, we're going to be sending out letters sometime probably in the summer of this year, notifying you that you're in this in the Petaluma River watershed and that you're subject to some requirements to protect water quality. It requires that you come up with your monitoring plan within 1 year, and that you complete your ranch plan within 2 years. And then annually, we have a requirement for a report that you send to us. It's a short form that basically talks about your results from your monitoring, and also just confirming that you've completed your tasks in your ranch plan. So, this is just kind of moving forward. So if you're one of those people that gets the letter, you'll have to file for enrollment under the permit. You have about 90 days to do that. And then for the first winter, we would ask that you start to think about your facility and assess it, prepare for winter by removing manure from areas that are vulnerable, and eliminate your discharges that aren't controlled. And then start to think about your monitoring your ranch plan, and maybe reaching out and getting help from your local agencies. So here's just our contact information, our website, and on our website, there's this link where you can find out if your specific address is located within our region or if it's located within certain watersheds. And our contacts are Morgan Williams. She's our staff person that's in charge of the confined facility program, and my contact, Lori Tull. That's it.
Terrific. Thank you, Lori.
We'll stop sharing.
Okay. Just see if any questions pop up from anyone. And if not, we can check again at the end of the presentations. That was great. Thank you so much. So our next speaker, I believe, is Carrie Wester from the Sonoma Resource Conservation District. And there she is.
Okay, can you folks see a map on your screen?
We can, or I can.
Okay. All right, good afternoon for folks that are in the afternoon. I know that some folks are joining us from different areas today. I want to introduce myself. My name is Carrie Wester. I am a project manager with the Sonoma Resource Conservation District. And to give this first slide here is just to give folks a little bit more context of where we specifically work, and then where the permit that Lori had been talking about, where that applies and where some of the funding we have applies. So if you're from out of the area, we are in Northern California. We're about 45 minutes north of San Francisco. The Sonoma County is outlined there in black, with the Petaluma River watershed outlined in green. That is where Lori mentioned some of this regulatory compliance would be covering, and I'll talk a little bit more about that too. Advanced slide, I can do this. There we go, I got too many screens open. Okay, just a little bit more detailed view. Here is Sonoma County. Just a little bit of background on Sonoma RCD. Indicates our kind of geographical district there. We share Sonoma County with our neighboring RCD, Gold Ridge RCD. Sonoma RCD covers over 919,000 acres. It's about 85% of Sonoma County, from the top border of Sonoma County and Mendocino down to the border with Marin County and San Pablo Bay. And the shaded areas just kind of give you a sense of the different watersheds that we work in the area. A little background on the Sonoma RCD. Elaine had mentioned RCDs, resource conservation districts, soil water conservation districts. We have different names throughout the nation. Here we're referred to as the Sonoma Resource Conservation District. We were created in the 1940s to assist landowners with educational, technical, and financial resources for soil and water conservation projects and programs. It's basically was a result of the Dust Bowl era. We have a 75 plus year history of assisting landowners specifically on the ground in Sonoma County. As Elaine had mentioned, the RCDs are non-regulatory and we are local. We're referred to as a special district, which is similar to like a fire department. One unique role of the RCDs is that we are a liaison between landowners and regulatory agencies, which is kind of our role here today too. Another unique role that we have is we are able to identify and solicit funding sources for our programs. So most of our funding is exclusively grant funded or fee-for-service funded. We also have staff with a wide variety of natural resource and agricultural disciplines, from planners to erosion control specialists, and also engineers on staff as well. One of the programs that we offer is a regional program that we do with several other RCDs in the region. We refer to it as our Land Smart Planning Program. It was developed originally to focus on water quality, and especially since that's what we're talking most about today. And the idea here is that our planning program develops conservation plans that we set these priorities for what we call beneficial management practices, either to, in some cases, to comply with regulations, but at the end of the day, we also want to keep the land productive. And so this is an example of, Lori was talking about ranch water quality plans, and so this would be something that could comply with those regulations. Again, the purpose is with our conservation planning, is to assist land managers in accomplishing their natural resource goals, and then in some cases meeting or exceeding environmental regulations. We provide the technical assistance and financial support to not only develop plans, but in some cases also implement the practices that are identified in the plans. We do have a website that's specific to our conservation planning program is landsmart.org, listed at the top there. There are templates on this website available. Currently we have templates for a variety of land uses, including vineyard, rangeland, confined animal or equine, forest land, and I believe that we're working on an orchard template as well. So there's a variety of land uses where templates are available, along with just general resources on conservation planning for each of those land uses. And that's publicly available. Anybody can view those resources. I wanted to highlight one component of our plans that is very helpful if you're a visual person like me, is the maps that we develop with our Land Smart plans. Basically what we do is there's a variety of maps that are developed for each property. And at the beginning, we document just basic property features, where things are at on the property. On an equine facility, we'll be looking at, your paddocks, your corrals, where your water troughs are, where your stalls are, and where the drainage is, and where your manure management areas are. It's really helpful once you get things on a map to see where you may have issues and visualize potential solutions and opportunities. And here, the list here is just to give you an idea of all the different aspects of a property that we take into consideration when we're doing a plan. So there's a lot of different areas, and kind of like Elaine has been going through, that, you know, come into play when we're thinking of equine facilities related to water quality and reducing mud and improving pastures. So there's a lot of different aspects that we'll look at with regard to the Land Smart plan. One other thing that landowners have also found really helpful with these maps is just to have a map for the facility. A lot of times folks don't have you know, basic maps done for the facility, and especially if you have folks coming on site for various activities or services, it's really helpful, you know, to have a big map posted somewhere so that folks can become more familiar with the property and know kind of where things are and how to get around. So that's feedback that we've received from folks that found the maps really valuable. So as Lori mentioned too, the RCD currently has funding opportunity right now to develop Land Smart plans for equine facilities. This specific funding comes from the US EPA and the State Water Resource Control Board. It's through their 319H program, if you're familiar with that specific funding. It includes financial assistance for confined animal facilities within the Petaluma River watershed. That's that green area that was shaded on that first map I showed you. We're also providing education regarding water quality issues on confined facilities. This workshop being the first one of several to come. So I'm glad that we can provide some support for this. And then as well as the development of Land Smart plans or these ranch water quality plans for these equine facilities within this watershed. So for folks that this may be of benefit or of interest, you know, that are living in the Petaluma area, I just wanted to give a brief overview of the funding process with the RCD if you are interested. The first thing that I would recommend is just to reach out to the RCD with, if you're interested, and I will provide my contact, or I think Terry will provide my contact information, and it'll be at the end of my presentation too. But I would just recommend reaching out to me specifically. After that, the RCD will start to gather some just basic property information, where your property is located, its size, the kind of details of your operation, how many animals, etc., and likely do a site visit associated with that. Then what we'll do is we'll rank properties that have expressed interest. We'll use a criteria that we have yet to develop, but it'll likely be based around a potential water quality threat and need. So we'll take those highest ranked properties that are interested in development of ranch water quality plans, and we'll select the highest ones. And just to give folks a sense, we do have funding for 7 plans over the next 2 years for this specific funding. And then the last point there, the RCD does require a 15% cost share to develop a plan. The cost really depends on the operation size and the complexity of the site, but I'd estimate it to be around $500 to $1,000 per plan, just to give you a sense of what that would be. And we do have waivers available for folks with financial hardships. And that was all I was going to present on today. I'm happy to answer any questions. I know we're a little bit behind agenda today, so here's my contact information, and I am happy to stick around to answer any questions. And I guess I'll.
Thank you, Carrie. I'm just checking not seeing any current answer. I think Lori is answering a question that someone asked on her presentation. But I just also wanted to let folks know that Carrie did put in a link for all of you around the country who want to find your local RCDs, which highly encouraged to do. And Carrie, I have a question. Is there a similar program or agency in Canada that you know of?
That's a good question. I would anticipate there would be. I can't think of, what their name would be. So I'm not sure.
They're in Canada, they're supposed to contact their Canada Agriculture Office to find out what resources are available and what regulations might be there, what cost sharing is available, and what help they can get. I think it's called Canada Agriculture.
Great. Thanks for that. Okay, so, well, if questions come up, we'll answer them. But meanwhile, we can go to Brooke Pippy, who's from the NRCS, Natural Resource Conservation Service. So Brooke, are you there?
Yes, I am here. Hopefully you can see me, and I'm gonna
see you.
Great. I'm gonna share my screen here. Hopefully it works. I apologize. This is my first time doing this, so we'll just learn together here.
Yes.
Okay, so hi, my name is Brooke Pippy. I am an agricultural engineer with the United States Department of Agriculture, the Natural Resources Conservation Service. I serve Sonoma and Marin counties, the areas that both Lori and Carrie have previously talked about. But we are a national organization, and we provide technical and financial assistance across the nation to farmers and ranchers who are interested in engaging with us. Who are we and where did we come from? So like I previously said, NRCS stands for the Natural Resources Conservation Service, and we are a federal agency under the Department of Agriculture. And we were created in 1935. And back then we were called the Soil Conservation Service, and we were our creation was a direct result of the disaster termed the Dust Bowl in the 1930s, where we had a lot of loss of topsoil in the Midwest region of the country, and the federal government realized the need for an agency to give voluntary advice and technical assistance to farmers and ranchers to avoid the consequences that we saw during the Dust Bowl. So what do we do and why? We are a voluntary agency. We offer free science-based advice to farmers and ranchers and also private forest landowners. We are non-regulatory, but we do have to comply with all regulations when we are providing financial and technical assistance. And we help create conservation plans very similar and alongside with the RCD as described by Carrie for your individual operation, which then can be eligible for a lot of opportunities for financial assistance to then implement those recommendations. I will say that we co-evolved with our local resource conservation districts. They really were established alongside of the Soil Conservation Service to provide a intermediary body between the federal government and private landowners. So that people felt comfortable engaging with us on this aspect of their land. We have a number of disciplines and scientific advisors within our own agency, and there's a list there on the screen. We have soil conservationists, rangeland specialists, and I do believe we have our own Petaluma rangeland specialist here with us, Sebastian Tucanos. We have agricultural and civil engineers. We have geologists. We have wildlife biologists. We have wetland specialists, soil scientists, agronomists, air quality specialists, archaeologists, and a lot more. So we really try to provide a full cadre of expertise for when producers are engaging with us and looking to explore options to address their on-farm goals. So we offer technical assistance to producers, and this is just some old information about some of those dollars that are invested and some of the economic impacts. On the slide from 2014 to 2017, 2.6 billion was invested in the planning and implementation of conservation practices, generating local agriculture economic activity across the nation, resulting in over $1 billion, and then supporting over 12,000 jobs each year through our agency. This is our bread and butter of financial programs that are authorized every 4 years through the Farm Bill, which is legislation passed through our nation's Congress. EQIP is our Environmental Quality Incentives Program, and that really is our main financial mechanism to provide producers and private forest landowners incentive dollars to help them implement conservation practices on the ground. And so again, from roughly the same time period, you can see some of the dollar amounts that were invested across the nation, 3.5 billion in new conservation practices, generating over 1.5 billion in annual economic activity, and then supporting close to 23,000 jobs each year. This is a little bit more about the Environmental Quality Incentives Program. Again, we engage with agricultural producers for this program. Our technical assistance is open to anyone that is a resident in our local area, but our financial programs really are geared specifically towards agricultural producers. And these contracts really include a suite of conservation practices that have been agreed upon and explored to address the on-farm resource concerns that can be associated with things like fire recovery, erosion control, weed and pasture management, manure management, and all of the things that we've been talking about today. There are no invoices necessary. This is a program that exists as basically a reimbursement program once the project is completed, and the practices that are installed must be installed to NRCS standards and specifications. And there are some links embedded in this presentation that I can hopefully provide to attendees that can provide more information. So how do we assist on different types of agricultural lands? And so there are a number, probably over 1,000 different types of conservation practices that we offer, with smaller components to describe individual site-specific conditions that each practice might apply to. And so we do have quite a nice library, I will say, of conservation practices to select based on your on-farm goals and kind of what you're seeing and what you would like to address, and priorities that are higher than others to address first. And then as we go through implementing the conservation plan, you can address some of the other the other lower priority goals that you might have. But this is, excuse me, these are some pictures. The upper right corner is a picture of a border hedgerow or a field border along a road. And you can kind of see the field that's behind it. We do offer a lot of different types of planting practices, as well as selecting planting pallets and looking at your soils and discussing pros and cons of types of vegetation that you may or may not want there. The lower left hand corner shows a cover crop in a vineyard. And we offer different types of practices based on different types of goals that you may or may not have for your cover crops in your fields. And then in the lower right-hand corner, we have an example of a big, I believe this is it's supposed to be a pollinator planting here. although it's not really showing a lot of the flowering plants, but it's a large area that has been given over to an insect habitat to really provide year-round quality forage for insects. And I believe you can see sort of the crop in the background there, but this is an area between fields. We also offer many types of pasture management practices to develop pasture health, like seeding, weed control, cross fencing, water development, and lots of other kinds of things. So getting into some of the practices that we offer on rangeland and animal livestock facilities, we definitely support the benefits of rotational grazing systems in conservation activity, and the benefits to the soil, plant, and animals that come along with managing those resources. And so this is an example of some of the projects that EQIP actually provides financial support to implement. So in the left part of the slide, you have examples of fencing to really control animal movement. We do not offer cost share to set up agricultural operations. So this is for operations that are already in agricultural production. And then on the right-hand side, you can see parts of a livestock water system that were developed, a solar panel, a storage tank. The solar panel is connected to a below ground well that then can pump the water into this tank, and then distribute out that water to locations along the farm through pipeline and then into troughs. My local strength and expertise is really on confined animal operations. So I really work a lot with our local dairies in Sonoma and Marin County. We have over 80 dairies between the two counties. And so I spend a lot of time talking about animals and poop and what to do with it and how you want to be thinking about moving fresh water around the farm. I'm really glad that we have had a lot of discussion today about retainage on farms of water resources rather than drainage. We are really, really good at drainage, but we really, I think, need to focus on looking at retainage systems on farm, like the swales that Terry was talking about. And those were really fascinating to listen to. Terry, thank you so much for sharing. And those are the type of practices that we also provide cost share for. And that the RCD can also provide planning assistance to, and potentially other resources for grant opportunities as well for those projects. So getting back to confined animal facilities, we definitely provide a lot of assistance to these types of operations, really centered around two things: pasture management and manure management. And so when we engage with producers on either front, particularly with manure management, we like to see some type of baseline analysis that is conducted to look at how many animals do you have, where is manure going, how is manure being utilized and stored during the rainy season, and then where is that manure going out onto the fields or exported off the farm. And so that initial plan that we look at for a baseline condition on animal feeding operations, it's called a comprehensive nutrient management plan, or just a nutrient management plan, where we're looking at, again, where are nutrients coming, where are they going, where are they being stored, and how are they being used. And that plan will also give us, like Carrie's maps about looking at where things are going, gives us a real expanded document to look at opportunities to make improvements when you have that kind of baseline information. And so we really, we really require that plan. We offer financial assistance for that plan to producers, but we really do require that plan to be developed ahead of time of really planning out a big suite of conservation practices to then implement. The idea is that plan will give us a really good idea of where to start, and that we can continually implement in phases based off of what that plan has identified for us. So we do concrete lanes to capture and contain manure. We do roofs over manure management systems for housing in the wintertime. Again, we're not production oriented, so we are really addressing existing on-farm resource concerns that are visible and documented. And so the upper right hand and the lower left hand corners really show some of the animal housing facilities we are able to assist with, provided that we have an established manure management system in place, or parts of a manure management system to then be expanded upon or developed to then provide roofing and then potentially housing. The lower left is really an example of a manure / compost containment bunker for solid manure storage and then processing if other waste products are either being produced on the farm or imported on the farm to mix with the collected manure. But that's really a lot of the bulk of what we do for manure management on confined animal feeding operations. If there are pastured areas that are associated with this operation, like many of our pasture-based organic dairies are, then we do also have a suite of pasture management practices that we can use to help really maximize that as an on-farm resource for producers and really look at opportunities for expanding yields, production, look at opportunities for really getting weed suppression implemented and things like that. And we have a lot of ability to have flexibility in our approach with our library of conservation practices that we offer. So to be eligible for our programs, I'll try and run really quickly through this. An applicant must be an agricultural producer or a private non-industrial forest landowner. They must have control of the land that they are requesting assistance on, either through a lease or a deed. And they have to apply with the Farm Bill adjusted gross income limitations for our programs. For this last Farm Bill, it was $900,000 for each year of the last 3 tax years. It's kind of a mouthful, but there are eligibility income caps for our programs. And then we also provide special rates for historically underserved clients those clients are eligible for a slightly higher reimbursement rate for our programs. And they are also eligible to receive advance payments before implementing their practice, which is a little bit different than normal EQIP program rules work. How do you contact us? We are a voluntary agency. We are not allowed to solicit our services, so you really have to reach out and contact us. We are across the nation and in all U.S. territories. If you Google your area and USDA NRCS, we should have a state website page that pops up, and then you can sort of Google through your own individual county and find your contact office that way. You reach out to us, set up a site visit, and we come out. We start talking about your goals, and you start the paperwork eligibility to apply for our programs. I'll warn you, there is a process there, and it definitely is a process of paperwork. But the good news is once you do establish program eligibility with us, you don't really have to do it again until we change things. And it also opens you up to a lot of other potential programs for agricultural producer assistance through USDA that are not just NRCS programs. So there is some really positive benefit to go through establishing farm records with us. Then we set up a site visit, we talk about your goals, through these conversations over time, we develop a conservation plan that is put on a map. And then there is usually 2 opportunities a year that we offer funding for those applications. Your plan is put into our system. It is ranked very similar to the process that Carrie described. It is ranked against all of the other applications in the area, and that means you're not necessarily competing statewide for this money. We have geographical areas and we have fund pools so that we can target our dollars a little bit more specifically to where we see a lot of response and need and resource concerns to address, particularly water quality on a watershed wide level would be something like that. We develop a conservation plan. That plan is then ranked. If it is selected for funding, at that point is when we start progressing into the process to sign it into an official contract. In doing that, we have to, of course, apply for, we have to comply with all federal, state, and local laws. And we also have to internally comply with biological and cultural resources reviews. So we have our own internal archaeologists and biologists that do those reviews and that conduct the necessary interagency communications for the project. There's very little to do on your end except for give us the permission to do this on your behalf for the project. Once those reviews are complete and you have received all of your requirements on how to install the project, then you can go and install the project. And the requirements are there to show you how to install the project so that it can be done to the way to NRCS standard and specification. And then we can provide financial reimbursement once we've gone out and verified those practices that they have been installed. And then that verification becomes your final payment on the practice. And you get to receive just money in your bank account once all of this has happened. Once we've seen the project go in, we take the pictures to document it and we verify installed quantities. And then we process your project for payment. And hopefully that's as clear as mud. These are the local contacts for the Petaluma NRCS field office. The left is our senior soil conservationist, Nick Goodman, and his contact information. And on the right is my contact information. And if you are interested in engaging with us, I would be happy to talk with you about that process and get that started. So please feel free to reach out to me anytime. On this contact information slide is also the NRCS California website link and the equip link for our programs to read a little bit more about it. And then there is some post-fire publications that we have been releasing, although we haven't had a lot of fire activity in the last couple of years, which has been really nice. But we have been providing a lot of post-fire support to those people that have been affected by wildfires in the last few years. And I think that's all I have. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Brooke. It was great. Lots of information. Thank you so much.
Hopefully I didn't overwhelm you too much.
Well, it's always good to have information so people can weed out whatever they like. But no, it was great. It was great. I learned a lot listening to that. So sometimes it takes a little bit for, questions to come in. So maybe I'll just linger here for a moment. Do any of the panelists have anything else they need to add or say before we close out?
I was just going to say that I typed in some answers for people as well, so they might see that.
That's terrific. Yeah, be sure to check the question and answer box, everyone, and also the chat box. And yeah, I think we got to a lot of the questions. And thank you to the other folks. I know Sebastian and Lori put in answers as well, and that was real helpful.
Lots of good resources there for the folks that are local in California. I really encourage you to take advantage of these resources. And they're all the agencies that I've worked with either through work or through my places where we've lived and raised horses, and they're excellent resources. They're going to be able to help you with a lot of things, from locating native plants to finding cost sharing for getting some of these practices implemented, to getting designs for compost bins. So these services are free, and we should take advantage of it as horse people.
Yeah. Yes, they're wonderful agencies. They're really great. And I so appreciate them all being a part of this webinar as well. So thank you, everyone, so much.
Thank you all for putting this on.
Oh, yeah. Absolutely. Yeah, it's important, I think. So to all of you who are still with us, thank you so much for joining us today. Once again, you will be receiving a link to the video of today's recording along with a resource sheet that you'll be able to refer to for information about what we learned today. You're welcome to share this recording and the resources with friends and anyone else you know. And please feel free to contact me if you have any follow-up questions. I'll be putting my contact information, if you don't already have it, I'll be putting that in the resource sheet. I know somebody was asking about that. And I know I'll be seeing a few of you who live locally tomorrow at 11 for our in-person tour. And as we close, I'm going to put up a brief survey. It should appear in your browser. If you'd like to tell us what you liked about this webinar and what we can do better for next time, it always helps to hear from you. And as I close my camera, I'll be staying on for a few minutes to answer any follow-up questions that come through the Q&A. So, and Elaine, I don't know if you wanted to do that as well, but I'm happy to sort of hang out here for a bit in case people have follow-up questions. So, last chance for any.
I can stay a little bit, and I can look at see if there's any other Q&A questions that I can answer.
Okay, great. Yeah, I can see a couple are just coming up here, or some thank yous. Yeah, thank you so much, everyone, for joining us. Okay, and some people are asking for that star thistle information, so I'll get that out to folks too. I'll include that in the resource sheet. Okay, well, here's an interesting question. I don't know is Lori still here? Yeah, she is, I think. Lori, so Rick is asking if there are 4 million people in the Bay Area and 90% positive on the bar chart, and 100,000 horses in the Bay Area and 90%, then humans are 97.5% of the EPF issue, and horses are 2.5%. Why put restrictions on ranchers? Can you address that?
This is a really good question, and of course we get this a lot. And we get the question not just from the ag community, but from all different industries about why us. And it depends. The answer is pretty much it depends. But in certain watersheds, we're required to address all the sources that are potentially impacting that waterway. And yes, humans are definitely part of the problem in the Petaluma watershed. We have a huge homelessness problem across the Bay Area, and that is a much larger issue to address. But we are working with other local agencies to come up with the right solutions for that as it impacts water quality. Our agency our purview is limited to certain aspects of that. So there are many different it's a kaleidoscope of issues that surround the human impact of a waterway, but we are definitely involved in many different facets of the human input when it comes from, whether it comes from homelessness or whether it comes from on-site sewage treatment facilities, septic systems, locations of certain facilities, things like that. So we have to kind of venture out into all these different areas that could be impacting one waterway. Animals are one of them. And each region in the state has to come up with their solutions for those sources. We are mandated to do that. And in our region, we've tried to come up with a program that specifically for animals that is protective, but also practical and not too expensive, and something that is BMP based, which is best management practices. It's based on management of your facility, and we don't want to be over regulatory and micromanaging. We try to let you decide what you need to do on your facility in order to protect water quality. So yes, I understand the frustration. It's why require these things in a blanket way across the whole region. We do try to focus in on where the water quality problems are. And then we tier these requirements based on the types of facilities. So the dairies are much more of a higher water quality risk when it comes to managing manure, just because of sheer volume. And so their requirements are stricter and a little more structured than, say, for a horse boarding facility. And then for facilities that are more like horse boarding, they're tiered out into another tier so that the requirements are less onerous, but tailored more to your type of facility. So I understand the frustration. We do try to tailor what we're required to do with what's practical on the ground and also protective of water quality. Hope that answers your question the best way I can do it.
Thank you for that.
Yeah.
And then here's an open question to anyone. Any ideas for eradicating poison oak and Scotch broom to increase grassland?
Goats.
That's what I was going to say, goats.
Yeah, goats is a great idea, actually. But again, I'd talk to your local resources and see what they suggest.
Mm-hmm.
I'll just
go ahead, Carrie.
I was just going to add a note that the Scotch broom, at least in our area, has definitely been an issue since several years of fires, and Scotch broom has come in full force. The RCD does have a grant, and we are currently using grazing as a tool to manage Scotch broom. So the jury is still out, and we will post that information, when we finish the project to see, how effective it was.
Great. Getting some thank yous here. Okay, I think that's all the current questions we have. Okay, so Sebastian from the NRCS here is posting that please feel free to reach out to me regarding weed, water, pasture, and manure management issues in the Sonoma and Marin County areas. He has his email there, so if everyone checks in the Q&A box, you'll see his contact information, and I will also include it in the resource sheet so everyone can contact him with those questions or anything particular to the NRCS. Thank you, Sebastian. Any other last minute thoughts from any of our panelists or any other questions from the group? We have a few folks hanging on. Alrighty, well, I'm not seeing any follow-up questions, so we're not too bad on time. So if no one else has any last minute thoughts, I will go ahead and close out the webinar. Thank you again, all of the wonderful presenters and all the great information that you all provided. Really appreciate it. Thank you so much.